Ladies and gentlemen, please rise for the Philippine National Anthem.
Bayang magiliw, perlas ng silanganan, alab ng puso, sa dibdib mo'y buhay. Lupang hinirang, duyan ka ng magiting, sa manlulupig, di ka pasisiil, sa dagat at bundok, sa simoy at sa langit mong bughaw. May dilag ang tula at awit sa paglayang minamahal. Ang kislap ng watawat mo'y tagumpay na nagniningning. Ang bituin at araw niya kailan pa may di magdidilim. Lupa ng araw ng luwalhati pagsinta, buhay ay langit sa piling mo. Aming ligaya na pag may mga api, ang mamatay ng dahil sa'yo.
Thank you. You may now take your seats. To officially open the forum, let's give a warm welcome to the President of the Canadian Chamber of Commerce of the Philippines, Mr. Julian Payne.
Good morning. Good morning to all of you. It's my pleasure and honor to open and to welcome you to this Arangkada forum on behalf of the 7 members of the Joint Chambers of Commerce of the Foreign Chambers of Commerce of the Philippines. Just to mention, the American Chamber of Commerce of the Philippines, the oldest, over 100 years, working in partnership with the Philippines for business for both countries. The Australian-New Zealand Chamber of Commerce of the Philippines, the member from the vast southern hemisphere with its great potential. The Canadian Chamber of Commerce of the Philippines, the largest country in the Western Hemisphere of the Americas. The European Chamber of Commerce of the Philippines, representing a great economic and business bloc in the world. The Japanese Chamber of Commerce of the Philippines, the donor, the largest donor of low-cost interest loans for infrastructure and other things. The Korean Chamber of Commerce of the Philippines, for the last 5 years, providing the largest number of tourists to the Philippines and underpinning the great tourism industry. Last and not least, Primuri, representing regional headquarters. These regional headquarters add to the stature of the Philippines as a regional center and deserves to be encouraged. With nearly over 700 participants here today expected, I cannot actually acknowledge every VIP. You are all VIPs. The VIPs who are participating in committees and sessions and panels will be acknowledged by their speakers, but let me welcome you all. I would also like to thank our corporate sponsors. Without corporate sponsors, this event would not be possible. I would like to thank our business association partners, particularly those national Philippine business associations without whom the JFC could not be effective. Thank you so much. I would like to thank our media sponsors. We need the media to publicize this event, and we thank you. And I would like to thank all the Philippine government officials and media officials who are attending. Last and not least, I would like to thank you, the audience. No event is possible without an audience, and many of you have come here many, many times over the years, and we thank you for your loyalty, your feedback, and your participation. Some people may be wondering about some new participants may be wondering about the title Arangkada. Arangkada is a Tagalog word. It means accelerate. It's shouted by jeepney drivers who say, Arangkada, as they want to move forward and perhaps hit the car in front of them. Anyway, the JFC selected the word in 2010 to promote its advocacy of trying to look ahead and improve the Philippine economy for everybody, foreigners, Filipinos, everybody. If we look back over the years since 2010, we can see there has been a great acceleration. The GDP has accelerated. Capital formation has accelerated. Foreign investment has increased. These are all great signs. There have been some other signs which have not been accelerated quite so fast. Yes, employment has increased, but not fast enough. And there have been sectors which have actually not fallen behind, but been left behind. I'm thinking in particular the great potential of agribiz and mining. These two sectors have potential to increase our growth figures, to increase employment, and to increase taxation revenues to support other countries. But above all, the biggest challenge that I think everybody agrees, all of the business associations with a common front, has been to improve the infrastructure in this country as an underpinning for sustained economic growth. Today we have a title, Better Infrastructure for Strong Economy. But infrastructure is such a broad topic, we cannot cover it all. So we're focusing on certain sectors: roads and rail, seaports and shipping, and water. And the JFC, with the Arangkada program, has produced some excellent policy briefs which are being distributed to you today. We will be having a fourth panel to discuss the wave of new cities. What is obvious in the Philippines is that not only Metro Manila, not only Cebu, not only Davao, but there's a whole new wave of cities evolving, and that these need to be supported to help overcome the congestion in Metro Manila and increasingly in Cebu and Davao. I should also mention that there will be this year for the first time a second Arangkada Forum in November on the 27th, which will be covering the exciting areas of creative industries. We welcome you to participate in that and be creative. Before the panels begin, we'll be privileged to hear one of the country's most prominent and business associations representative, Mon Fernandez, President of the Management Association of the Philippines. Where is Mon? Where is he? Stand up, Mon, so people can see you. Big clap for Mon. We will also be followed by the chairperson of the Senate Committee on Economic Affairs, Senator Gatchalian. Senator, are you here? Where's the good senator? Not yet. Okay, he'll be speaking to us. He's been a great friend of business, and we're looking forward to hearing his comments. I will now welcome to the podium none other than John Forbes, who is known to all of you, I think. And if he's not, it's a surprise. I believe he's not only known personally, but he also heads the Arangkada office in Ancham, and he deserves to have a big vote of thanks for organizing today's events. Thank you very much. John, welcome Mr. John Forbes. Thank you, John.
Good morning, Magandang umaga. And thank you very much to our cold northern neighbor from Canada, Julian Payne, who I may repeat a little bit, forgive me if what Julian said. Welcome to the 7th anniversary Arangkada Forum. Let me put up the slide once more to thank our event sponsors, of which there are so many, as Julian mentioned, both corporate sponsors, table sponsors, and media sponsors. We fit them all into one slide, and I encourage you to visit their booths outside. You know, this is an interactive forum. We have a hashtag, we have a Twitter account, we have a Facebook, we have something else, I think that's Google. You can communicate to us. We also have Wi-Fi, of course, so that you can do whatever you need to do if you can double task. And we're streaming this. So I also want to say hello to everybody out there in the wide, wide world who may be checking in at European or North American time, or even staying in bed right here in Metro Wet Manila. The program today, I don't want to go over it too much again. Julian has referred to it, but I do want everybody to reach into their delegate kit and pull out this excellent, excellent souvenir program, which has all the details. There is one replacement I understood this morning, and that the mayor of Tagbilaran is not able to come, but we do have Mayor Oka Morena from Cagayan de Oro on the panel on Next Wave Cities. As people mentioned, the president of MAP will give an opening speech, and we will move through a keynote speech, 4 panels. We are giving our Lifetime Achievement Award this afternoon for the, I believe, the 5th time, and we will conclude after the 4th panel with a speech by Senator Grace Poe, the chairman of 2, well, you'll hear more about that later, 2 committees, 2 important, and for the first time, I announce a networking cocktails. So I hope that you will linger a little bit in order to have fellowship and enjoy some wine and hors d'oeuvres with us at the conclusion this afternoon. Now, I'd like to remind people of the themes of the previous 6 Arangkada forums that we have organized. They have the next slide, please. Arangkada means to accelerate. In 2012, in the Marriott Hotel, we had a moving twice as fast. In 2013, it was realizing the potential. In 2014, it was more reforms equal more jobs. 2015, invest now for inclusive growth. 2016, bolder and more inclusive decade to come. The decade ahead, and last year, implementing the 10-point agenda. So moving on to this year, it's better infrastructure, and as Julian mentioned, on November 27th, creative industries, the new industry, the sunrise industry. Way back in 2007, the JFC announced that we should focus on 7 growth areas that we called the 7 big winner sectors. And those are mining, tourism, manufacturing and logistics, agribusiness, business process outsourcing, creative industries, and infrastructure. And as Julian noted, mining and agriculture remain challenged. On the other hand, business processing and tourism and manufacturing and logistics have been strong growth sectors. As I noted, creative industries will be a sunrise, and that brings us to the huge area of infrastructure. Let me note that we have published 2 previous policy briefs on infrastructure. We published broadband, and we published airports. I don't need to hold that up, but if you look in your bags, we have reprinted broadband and airports for you today to have copies, and then we are releasing 3 new ones today. If I get them in order, can we? I've got them all in front of me. This is a little confusing. Will you put them up in the slide, please? There we are. Water. We already used water today, every one of us. It's essential. Roads and rail. We needed a road to get here. In more developed societies, we would have come here by rail this morning. And finally, shipping, particularly in an archipelagic country like the Philippines, the blue economy and its growth is absolutely essential. So we have 3 panels on these policy briefs that will discuss them. Panel 1 will be on water. Panel 2 will be competitive rail and highway networks. Panel 3 will be ports, seaports, and shipping, and the blue economy. And I'm going to conclude by talking a little bit about foreign direct investment in the Philippines and spending on infrastructure, because these are 2 areas where I think people harp and you see talk about it being too low, et cetera. So we have to focus on its growth over a period of a decade. If we look at FDI inflows, when we started this project in 2010 until now, they've gone up 631%. The JFCs had a target of 7.5 billion to be realized within a decade. So that target was realized in less than a decade. In 2016, more or less, at 6.9, and it's gone up last year to almost 10 billion. And already this year, if you saw the report of the BSP numbers for the first half of this year, at 5.8 billion, if you simply double that to the end of the year, it could reach 12 billion by the end of this year. So there's no question, next slide, that FDI inflows into the Philippines have grown substantially, and there is great potential for them to grow much more. But that's also true of the entire region, where FDI is enormous, led by Europe and Japan and the United States and China in that order. I don't have that statistic, but I think that's quite well known. And the Philippines, in comparison, which is the red number on this slide at 9.5 billion, is at the same level as the green number, which is Malaysia. It's actually higher than Thailand last year, but short of Vietnam at 14 billion, and of course Indonesia is a much larger economy, which received 23 billion. Just to make the point that this region of 630 million people is getting a tremendous amount of FDI, and the Philippines is finally beginning to get its fair share, but still needs much more. The next slide is very interesting because this is per the average FDI per administration, starting going back to the Marcos administration and growing gradually to this record number in the first year, full year of the Duterte administration, close to 10 billion. So hopefully if I'm standing up here 2 or 3 or 4 years from now, that number will go up even higher into the next administration and my successor into future administrations. Now, talking quickly about infrastructure rankings, Philippines, as I think is widely known, if you look at the overall infrastructure rankings or you break it down, whether it's ports or railways or roads, under the WEF annual ratings, which will come out next month from Davos, the Philippines has been low ranked. You'll actually see, looking at this chart, the red going back a decade, that the rank has actually fallen. It was under 100 in the 08-09 WEF, and in the last one a year ago, it was 113 out of 137 countries. So that's where we stand, not because we're not trying harder in the Philippines by spending more, but because the others are doing better. The competition never sleeps. The next slide shows Philippine GDP, and this is the last slide, as a percent of infrastructure. The title's wrong. It's Philippine GDP as a percent of infrastructure. And if you go back, this goes back to 2005, you see actually the government, and it has the peso amount also on here, if you could focus on that. So you see in 2005, 1.5%, an anemic amount of GDP was being spent on infrastructure, and it was only 84 billion pesos. That has increased greatly, beginning at more or less near the midpoint of the Aquino administration. And according to the plans last year at this forum, Secretary Diokno spoke of the current administration with their Build, Build, Build program. They intend to reach a high number of 7% of GDP by the last year, 2022. Now, what's important is to look at the total amount of spending, because GDP, of course, is growing at above 6%. So the percentage of, if you keep your percentage of GDP at 6 or 7% that is being spent on infrastructure, the absolute amount of actual spending is increasing tremendously. So that the increases in If you look at the 2017, the actual of 691 billion, the increased plan for this year of 869 is about the same total amount that was being spent in 2007. So these are very, very significant expenditures. And in the road and rail policy brief, you'll see a chart on the largest spender on infrastructure, which is the Department of Public Works, and we have an undersecretary speaking later. Their spending has increased 1,000% to about $12 billion a year. And those are just small projects. They're not the big mega projects, but all over the country, they're improvements in roads and rails and water systems. So I'll leave you with the last slide, which shows what we're really talking about in the three policy briefs. And I'll shift to making an introduction of the next speaker, who has been announced, is the President of the Management Association of the Philippines. And we thank Mon Fernandez for doing that position, because I can tell you it takes up 25% of his time, and we should thank his boss, Mr. Pangalingan, for allowing him to serve in what is one of the largest business groups in the country and is extremely active. If you're not a member of MAP or MBC or PCCI, any of these business groups, I encourage you to look at joining them. You certainly get your value for your modest membership fee. Mr. Fernandez actually has worked in two of the sectors that are the subjects of policy briefs today. He has been in highways, and I think all of us have had the pleasure of going on a toll road that he was responsible for either building or his company, I should say, either building or managing the toll booths and putting in the RFIDs, and they're expanding considerably. And he shifted from moving in cars to moving water into our homes and out of our homes with one of the largest water concessions. So at this point, he's been in this field for over 20 years. May I invite my good friend, Mon Fernandez, President of MAP, to come up and give a keynote speech, an introductory speech from the point of view of the business sector.
Thank you, John. I will dispense with naming and recognizing all the VIPs here with us today. I'll go straight. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Magandang umaga po. I am deeply honored to be opening this year's Arangkada Filipinas Forum. For the last 7 years, this forum has been widely anticipated. It has innovated the way the government and business community work together on national interest issues. The recommendations that have come out of this exercise have helped make the business climate more resilient. Today's forum is devoted to infrastructure and its role in building a strong economy. And rightfully so, because quality infrastructure is key to sustainable growth. Infrastructure is the framework that supports economic growth. Roads, seaports, airports, and railway systems enable trade and mobility. Electricity powers production, and safe water is key to public health. When we put money into building and maintaining critical infrastructure assets, we create more jobs, improve overall productivity, promote a healthy and clean environment, and create wealth. A country's competitiveness is measured through its institutions, macroeconomy, health, primary education, and infrastructure. In the 2017 to 2018 Global Competitiveness Report released by the Geneva-based World Economic Forum, the Philippines ranked 56 out of 136 economies. The report cited inefficient government bureaucracy and inadequate supply of infrastructure as the two most problematic factors for doing business. What is important to note is that in the same benchmarking exercise as mentioned earlier, we scored only 3.4 out of 7 and ranked 97 out of 137 economies for infrastructure. These results are consistent with those of the 2018 World Competitive Ranking done by the International Institute of Management Development in partnership with the Asian Institute of Management. We came in at the 50th spot among 63 countries. The report mentioned labor productivity and again, guess what? Poor infrastructure as the Philippines' main hurdles towards competitiveness. In both reports, we see the interconnection between infrastructure, productivity, and employment growth, and how this correlated with our country's competitiveness. This is the reason why the business community is very happy to see that the current administration acknowledged the important role of infrastructure in national development. Proof of this recognition is the inclusion of an infrastructure-focused policy statement in the 10-point socio-economic agenda of the current administration. Quote, accelerate annual infrastructure spending to account for 5% of GDP, with public-private partnership playing a key role. End of quote. The Management Association of the Philippines support this accelerated spending. Raising infrastructure spending to more than 5% of GDP is key to the current administration's Build, Build program, which is supposed to usher us in the golden age of Philippine infrastructure. We are also glad to see that after a slow 2017, infrastructure spending has surged by 42% year on year as of the second quarter of 2018. The government's catch-up plan is critical, considering that for 15 years since 2000, we have only been spending an average of 2 to 3% of GDP on infrastructure. We call on the government to ensure that this trajectory is maintained so that we can be well on our way towards becoming an upper middle income country by 2022 and reduce poverty by 14%. Allow me to spend the next part of my sharing to expound on the Management Association of the Philippines' position on specific and crucial topics, namely traffic congestion, airport, and seaport infrastructures. A high-quality transport infrastructure system enhances economic productivity by enabling efficient movement of people and goods. It is currently estimated that traffic congestion causes the economy approximately 3.5 billion pesos daily. This is how urgent and important the traffic problem is. Given this urgency, what can we do to ease, if not totally address, this problem? Some of the quick fixes that we want to see happen include the following. First, we want to see all mabuhay lanes cleared of all forms of traffic obstructions. More so now, with the announcement that several bridges and a flyover in Manila will be closed for repairs and restoration. There are currently 17 mabuhay lanes designated by MMDA. Illegally parked vehicles and commercial activities along the streets prevent these identified lanes from serving their purpose. Second, we also want to see more qualified enforcers deployed, more qualified traffic enforcers deployed, especially in high traffic areas. We all know that the number of motorists who obey traffic rules is directly proportional to the visibility of enforcers. So it goes without saying that having more qualified traffic enforcers out there will also help ease traffic congestion. Third, more CCTVs should be installed in our streets in support of MMDA's non-contact apprehension policy. It's a laudable program for enforcing traffic rules while eliminating the possibility of corruption. It deserves more investments, definitely, in hardware. We do know that the problem of traffic congestion will not go away with these quick fixes. It must be complemented by the accelerated construction of more elevated roads, as well as limited access metro expressways and also bridges. The Management of Association of the Philippines fully supports the expansion and upgrading of the mass transport system, including light and heavy rail systems, as a sustainable solution to traffic congestion. We also have fully endorsed the MRT and LRT common station, which is currently under design and construction. We believe this will promote intermodal transport and provide a viable alternative to commuters and even motorists. We cannot overemphasize the urgency. The time for concerted action to address traffic congestion is now. Actually, the time for action was needed yesterday. Annual car purchases have doubled from 200,000 in 2012 to as much as 400,000. Records show that for the first half of 2018 alone, an additional of 171 cars were bought from the market. If we don't take this seriously now, the volume of vehicles that we are adding to the pool every day will definitely only compound the problem. The Management Association of the Philippines recognized the work being done to expand the capacity of our airports across the country. Just last June, we saw the inauguration of the new Mactan Cebu International Airport Terminal 2, which has increased capacity to 12.5 million from 4.5 million travelers. Work continues in Mactan Airport as well as in the airports of Clark, Bohol, Bicol, Puerto Princesa, Davao, and Cagayan de Oro, to name a few. Not only that, we're also happy to note the efforts to improve the night rating of more airports. Our very own NAIA has recently transitioned its air traffic management system from Eurocat to CNS ATM. The computerized system will ensure stable and more efficient traffic over Philippine airspace. the Management Association of the Philippines support the Airport Complementation Strategy, which aims to decongest NAIA, give travelers more options for traveling, for flying, and spread development across Luzon. Aside from NAIA, state-owned Clark and Subic airports would be the ideal core components for this strategy, as these are already operational. Together, these three airports have the potential combined capacity of 150 million passengers when fully optimized. We believe this is the fastest and most efficient solution to our airport infrastructure concerns. There is also the matter of seaports, as many of our member businesses rely on our network of seaports for an efficient supply chain, from the movement of raw materials to the eventual distribution of finished goods to local and international markets. Port congestion paralyzes business. It affects manufacturing efficiencies, causes missed delivery commitments, and damage business reputation. We simply cannot afford having to deal with another port congestion crisis. Having said all this, allow me to offer, on behalf of the MAP, some insights on the government's infrastructure development strategy. I think part of the reason why we have major and very costly infrastructure issues today is because we have a problem with continuity of projects and policies. We would like to see master plans issued and implemented to the end, instead of resetting with every change of administration. This does not help build investor confidence. Often, changes in policies also mean deviations from contractual obligations. We need to emphasize that businesses just simply want predictability. If we want to see more active participation by the business community, we should start with giving them the assurances that the sanctity of contracts will be upheld. From what we have seen today, I would like to say, after a sluggish start in 2017, we appreciate the increased pace of project implementation this year. However, we need to keep this pace to build up momentum. The government needs to be ready and willing to address the challenges of implementing each infrastructure project. It has to do this with more vigor and political will. Perhaps the same intensity as it is dealing with the current problem in Boracay, with the real honest-to-goodness demolition of illegal structures in our own Boracay. One very important challenge that I'm very sure many of us had to deal with is the right of way. The government needs to put in more budget to the implementation of the right of way law of 2016. We need more qualified people to handle simultaneous and nationwide right-of-way acquisitions. Otherwise, the seemingly minor component will continue to impede implementation and delay timelines. Over the next 10 years, $180 billion is programmed to be infused into the economy in the form of infrastructure investment as part of the Build, Build, Build program. This is expected to create jobs, reduce poverty, attract investors, boost the economy, and promote inclusive development. But one of the important questions that have been raised is, what should be the mode of delivery? Comments and opinions have pitted PPP against ODA. We think we should be looking at ODA plus PPP, with room for both solicited and unsolicited projects. There is no single mode of delivery that will work for all types of projects. The choice should be based on the nature and scope of the project, the project size and value, the technical capability of the implementing government agency, and the terms and conditions of the ODA and donor country. Finally, we also want to point out the fact that infrastructure projects are often held hostage by layers and layers of the bureaucratic process. Consistent with one of MAP's theme for 2018 on ease of doing business, we would like to take this opportunity to recommend government action to reduce political interference into infrastructure projects. Given the magnitude of infrastructure projects, we believe that supervision and approvals should be lodged with the executive branch's regulatory agencies. Opening up major national projects to LGU interference will only be counterproductive. We support Arangkada, Philippines. We still have a lot to do together. In closing, I am hopeful that today's activity will give us the opportunity to put our heads together to find more answers. I am also confident that when these answers have been pulled together, what will underpin them is our stronger and shared commitment to the development of our beloved country. Again, thank you very much for this opportunity. Magandang umaga po.
Thank you, Mr. Fernandez. To introduce the first keynote speaker for today, let's call on stage the President of the Australian-New Zealand Chamber of Commerce of the Philippines and the Country Manager of Convergia Philippines, Mr. Daniel Alexander.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for coming today, and please join me in another round of applause for Ramon Fernandez. It was a great opening speech. I'm honored today to introduce the chairman of two of the most important committees in the Philippine Senate, the Committee on Energy and the Committee on Economic Affairs, Senator Win Gatchalian. Our speaker is a public servant whose integrity and relentless drive to serve his country makes him one of the most dedicated lawmakers of the 17th Congress. The senator joined the Senate in 2016 and is already making his mark as a proponent on reforms that will improve the economy and the lives of Filipinos. The senator arrived in the Senate with 15 years of experience in the private sector, divided by 2 terms as a representative of Venezuela City in the House of Representatives and 9 years as City Mayor of Venezuela. Senator Gatchalian helped spark an economic renaissance Venezuela by enacting policies that foster robust competition, encourage investments, and make doing business easier. Before that, he spent a decade in the private sector working in aviation, real estate, hotels, and banking. The senator earned his Bachelor of Science degree in Finance and Operations Management from Boston University. And while studying in Boston, I hope he got a chance to see the Red Sox and the Boston Celtics. As chair of two of the most important committees in the Senate, his approach has had a common theme, and that's to empower consumers. He has steered both committees towards the passage of key measures aimed at fostering the same kind of competitive, investor-friendly, red tape-free environment in the energy sector, as well as the Philippine economy in general. The Joint Foreign Chambers are very grateful for Senator Gatchalian for his efforts to improve the business environment and to help implement point number 3 of President Duterte's socio-economic agenda to increase competitiveness and ease of doing business, and to pursue the relaxation of the constitutional restrictions on foreign ownership in order to attract FDI. In July, he chaired an unprecedented hearing to review the contents of the foreign investor negative list to understand how further liberalisation can positively impact the Philippine economy. Among his signature bills that have passed the Senate but are still pending in the House are the Energy Efficiency and Conservation Act, the Number Portability Act, and the Energy Virtual One-Stop Shop. We look forward now to hearing about the reform policies and the laws that he advocates. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Senator Win Gatchalian to the stage.
Thank you, Daniel. First and foremost, let me personally thank the GFC for coming all the way to the Senate yesterday. Yesterday, Mr. John Forbes, Mr. Peter Wallace, Mr. Julian Payne, Mr. Tago, and some other members of the GFC came to the Senate to brief the senators on their different advocacies, and especially in attracting FDIs, increasing competition here in our country. Yesterday, while the group was briefing the senators, I was looking closely at Mr. Forbes, Mr. Peter Wallace, Mr. Tago, and I was telling myself, they all look different from us. They might look Caucasian or Oriental, but deep inside, they're pusong Pinoy. Because I had the privilege in the last 2.5 years working with JFC and understanding what are the requirements in attracting the much needed FDIs here in our country. The JFC provided us with very practical, real life situations on how to attract foreign direct investments here in our country. And those experiences are very important to us because we want to tie up our legislation, our proposals, to the real-life situation that a lot of our small and medium enterprises, especially foreign investors who are looking at investing here in the Philippines, we want to tie them together and make sure that the loose ends are covered. Again, before I begin, let me greet our officials for this morning. Of course, Mr. John Forbes. Let me also greet Mr. James Wilkins, Mr. Eb Hinchcliffe. Let me also greet Mr. Daniel Alexander, who graciously introduced me this morning or earlier. Mr. Julian Payne also. And let me also greet Mr. Hunter Taos. Let me also greet Mr. Tago of the Japanese Chamber of Commerce, and to all the guest speakers this morning. Magandang umaga po sa inyo lahat. Good morning to everyone. Ladies and gentlemen, it is an honor and pleasure for me to speak before you today. As a businessman by profession, before entering public service, I have always believed that private enterprise plays an immeasurable role in spurring greater economic growth and social progress in a developing country such as the Philippines. Thus, in order to unlock the great potential of private commercial activity in the business of nation building, one of the important functions of government is to foster an inclusive, efficient, and competitive business environment. A critical indicator of our progress in creating this ideal business environment is the effectiveness and efficacy of foreign investment laws and policies. Thus, in July 2018, the Senate Committee on Economic Affairs conducted a public hearing akin to a portfolio review of the relevant laws and policies. Let us discuss some of our findings. One of the major findings of the committee revealed that the Foreign Investment Act of 1991, last amended 22 years ago by Republic Act 8179 in 1996, opened up certain areas for foreign investment, but it still remains restrictive. While the FIA aims to attract, promote, and welcome productive investments from foreign individuals and entities, certain provisions of the law create substantial barriers in the achievement of its objective, specifically the Foreign Investment Negative List, which contains areas of economic activity wherein foreign equity is restricted or limited. Even more limitations are found in various government issuances, rules, and regulations. The problem is made worse by the restrictive economic provisions of the 1987 Constitution, which were also recommended for amendment at the public hearing. Truly, the liberalization of our foreign investment laws is long overdue. These laws must be made responsive to the needs of the domestic economy and accommodate the dynamics of the regional and global environment. The Philippines has a relatively restrictive and less competitive policy on foreign investment, especially as compared to our ASEAN neighbors who have made great strides in promoting foreign investments. Liberalizing our laws by relaxing or eliminating these restrictions will allow the country to realize the benefits of FDI as the world transitions into a borderless economic community. Data from the Foreign Direct Investment Regulatory Restrictive Index, compiled by the OECD in 2015, reinforces the urgent nature of liberalization reforms in the Philippines. The Restrictiveness Index includes foreign equity restrictions, screening and prior approval requirements, rules and key personnel, and other restrictions on the operations of foreign enterprises in 68 countries, including all OECD and G20 countries. A higher score indicates a more restrictive foreign investment regime. With a score of 0.41 on the 2015 index, the Philippines was the only country to score above 0.40. This means that our laws restrict foreign investment even more than China, which has a score of 0.36. Saudi Arabia with 0.75, Myanmar with 0.36, and Indonesia with 0.31. For comparison, the other countries in Southeast Asia can be considered liberalized with scores less than 0.2. Guided by these insightful findings, the committee has undertaken a proactive role in championing reforms that will usher in a new, exciting era of economic growth and progress in our country through liberalization and competition legislation. Allow me to discuss the salient points of these bills and how they will benefit both the business community and the consumers. For starters, a timely example of how economic liberalization will unlock the potential of government and business to work hand in hand in nation building is the Philippine government's flagship infrastructure initiative, the Build, Build, Build. Through the Build, 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 the Duterte administration plans to spend between 8 to 9 trillion pesos, on expanding and updating the country's outdated national and regional transportation infrastructure. Ultimately, the economic future of the Philippines will rely greatly on the speedy completion of this revitalized network of roads, bridges, rails, seaports, and airports. The Build is truly a massive undertaking, with 44,000 projects having been bid out over the first 2 years of this administration alone. The workhorses of this undertaking are none other than the private construction firms contracted to provide the materials and manpower to turn the government's blueprints into finished concrete structures. Recent pronouncements by the government indicate that a non-stop, around-the-clock work regime could be put in place to speed up construction, meaning that we will need more private contractors than ever. This is a perfect opportunity to harness the capabilities of foreign construction firms to augment the capabilities and capacities of local firms. Unfortunately, antiquated laws and policies restrict foreign participation in construction and public works projects. To tap the great unrealized potential of foreign firms in making Build a success, I filed a trio of bills focused on the liberalization of the Philippine construction industry. Senate Bills 1907, 1909, and 1921 respectively seeks to amend 3 laws which regulate construction and public works projects. These laws are Commonwealth Act 541, or an act to regulate the awarding of contracts for construction or repair of public works, Republic Act 4566, or the Contractor's License Law, and Republic Act 9184, or the Government Procurement Reform Act. Essentially, these bills seek to remove nationality restrictions and provide equal opportunities to both domestic and foreign construction firms in applying for licenses and bidding for public works contracts. The end result of these reforms will be the institution of a free and fair competitive regime wherein public works projects, from simple to farm-to-market roads to big-ticket infrastructure initiatives, will be awarded to the firm which can provide the highest quality final product quickly and for the lowest cost, regardless of nationality. Thus, construction firms from across the world will be able to play a pivotal role in building the infrastructure to boost interconnectivity and productivity in the Philippine archipelago. And to just segue a bit, one of the most popular destinations for Filipinos now, every time there's a long holiday or the regular holidays, is to visit Japan, where Mr. Tago is from. And I'm always at awe that every time I visit Tokyo and there will be a regular maintenance work of the road, in about 2, probably 4 hours, that piece of road will be fixed before dawn. And sometimes those work will be very complicated, repairing of public utilities, maybe as long as 2 to 3 kilometers, but guaranteed those roads will be repaired before dawn. But if you go around our country and you see a lot of simple public works or maintenance repairs of our roads, sometimes a simple 1 kilometer road will take about a month to repair. And it is because I think that a lot of our technology and probably know-how is already antiquated, using very primitive technology and very what we call mano-mano procedure. No? Mano-mano tayo dito. The more people, the better, but not necessarily the fastest. And those are the technology and experiences that we want to bring to the Philippines, know-how from Japan, technology from Japan, in order to speed up construction and maintenance here in our country. A 6-year political cycle is very short. No? When I was a mayor, I always say that a 3-year political cycle is absolutely very short. And you need to finish as fast as you can before the election comes. Aside from strengthening physical interconnectivity, other target of the committee has been to utilize liberalization and competition to boost digital interconnectivity. The rapid development of superior telecommunications technology has been a catalyst for the birth of robust digital economies in countries which have made correct investments in accessible telecommunication infrastructure and smart regulatory frameworks. Unfortunately, I'm sure you have all experienced by now the slow and agonizing ordeal of using Wi-Fi or data connections here in the Philippines. The findings of the legislative inquiry conducted by the committee last year on the state of the Philippine telecommunications sector confirm with hard empirical data what is patently obvious from anecdotal evidence. In a nutshell, the duopoly of local firms in the Philippine telecommunications sector has stifled competition and caused the quality and affordability of Philippine telco services to lag behind the rest of the world. This is bad for business, bad for consumers, and detrimental to the development of a national digital economy. Based on the findings of this investigation, I filed a pair of bills aimed at fixing the dysfunctional dynamics of the Philippine telecommunications sector by fostering liberalization and competition that will eventually open avenues of meaningful participation for a third, fourth, fifth, or X number of telco players. And it is likely that many, if not all of these firms, will be foreign-owned. This will result in faster, more reliable, and more affordable telco services for personal, commercial, and industrial consumers, thus setting the stage for emergence of a vibrant Philippine digital economy. The first measure, Senate Bill 1594, seeks to amend the 80-year-old Public Services Act to clarify the definition of public utilities as only those public services which are natural monopolies by nature. In doing so, this will remove relevant industries from the classification and exempt them from foreign capital restrictions under the Constitution. In essence, this will foster greater foreign participation and investment in Philippine telecommunications, transportation, and other key public service industries. Meanwhile, Senate Bill 1644, or the Open Access in Data Transmission Act, will allow for the entry of additional telco players without requiring a congressional franchise by shifting towards an open access model in data transmission instead of a single vertically integrated network. Thus, this bill will open up the different segments of the market to other players by breaking down regulatory barriers, lowering down cost of entry, and institutionalizing a technology-neutral policy framework. This will greatly level the playing field between the two existing telco giants and any additional players who might want to get into the game. And I think a piece of good news, 2 days ago, the Congress, the House of Representatives already approved the Mobile Number Portability Act. It's the same measure that we approved in the Senate last February of this year. So essentially, this bill, after the bicameral conference committee, will allow consumers, cell phone users, to own or carry their cell phone numbers wherever they are. If a third telco player will come in, offering very cheap rates, very sophisticated services, and you want to move, you don't have to relinquish your old number. With this law, you can now carry your number to that new telco. So, and we think that this will enhance competition because definitely changing your number, especially if you're a businessman like Mon Fernandez, who has a lot of friends, it's very difficult to text 2,000 friends your new cell phone number. So this will help a lot of our businesses and our consumers to transfer from one telco to the other. Distinguished friends, bear in mind that this is just a brief snapshot of the work that the committee has done over the past 2 years. Unfortunately, I won't have the time to discuss other reforms, such as the Philippine Innovation Act, the Retail Trade Liberalization Amendments, among others. In closing, however, I would like to highlight the common thread that ties together our work, not only in the Economic Affairs Committee, but also in the Senate Energy Committee, which I also chair. In essence, the underlying philosophy at the heart of our legislative initiatives is the belief that free, fair, and vigorous competition in commerce, industry, and public services will result in game-changing benefits for consumers. When we advocate for the removal of the antiquated protectionist laws and policies, we do not mean to favor foreign players over domestic players. Our goal is to favor consumers by offering them better options in the market. Empowered consumers are the backbone of a vibrant, resilient, and inclusive national economy. Thus, our reforms aim to capitalize on foreign direct investments from Asia, the West, and other parts of the world in order to empower Philippine consumers and bring our national wealth and prosperity to greater heights. With that, I hope our short discussion today has inspired you to support these key initiatives as you deepen your partnerships and linkages with the Philippines. You can rest assured that reform-minded individuals will stop at nothing to bring to life the policies we have discussed today. Once again, thank you very much for your time, and mabuhay po ang Pilipinas.
We are deeply honored, Senator Sherwin Gatchalian. Thank you for joining us today. May we ask you to stay on stage for a quick photo opportunity together with the heads of our joint foreign chambers. We would also like to present you with our token of appreciation. Ladies and gentlemen, Senator Sherwin Gatchalian. Before we introduce our next speaker, we encourage everyone to actively participate in our discussions today, especially during our open forum. If you have questions, please approach any of the microphones on the floor and wait to be recognized by our moderator. We would also like to invite you to tweet about the event using our event hashtag Arangkada Fora 2018. Please also like us on Facebook and connect with us on LinkedIn. May we also request that you complete and submit the evaluation forms that were placed on your seats and hand them over to the registration counter at the ballroom foyer. We would also like to thank our sponsors today, our gold sponsors, silver sponsors, our bronze sponsors, patron sponsors, our partners supporting exhibitor connectivity, wine, and venue. We would also like to thank our table sponsors for joining us here today. After the program, we also encourage everyone to join the networking cocktails. To introduce our first panel entitled How to Survive the Coming Water Crisis, we have with us the President of the European Chamber of Commerce of the Philippines, Mr. Gunter Toss.
Thank you very much. Magandang umaga po sa inyo lahat. Good morning, everyone. Senator Gatchalian, your speech was indeed inspiring, and as I just said, probably the best speech I've heard in 10 years. So much power-packed, and we look forward working with you in the years to come. Up to now, I always thought the only thing fluid in the Philippines was water, because it doesn't know any borders and it doesn't know any restrictions. But I think with you at the helm of a number of those efforts, I think we're moving in the right direction. So I think it will be very interesting to work with you in the years to come. So thank you for your inspirational speech. Let me also welcome former PESA DG Lilia de Lima. We haven't seen you in a while, Mom. It's a pleasure to have you here. So thank you for gracing this occasion. And while I thought you meanwhile retired, it seems you're not. It seems you're more active than ever, but the country still needs you in whatever function it is. So welcome here and thank you for being around. Distinguished delegates, government and media guests, partners, ladies and gentlemen, I'm honored to introduce panel number 1. And as I said earlier, water is very close to our hearts. We can live without electricity, we can live without power, but we cannot live and sustain life without water. So naturally, water is something that we need to look at very closely. We have the water czar here in the form of Mon Fernandez, who talked about a lot of subjects earlier, but not his subject on water. And of course, Mr. Dondi Alikpala, who has been the water czar for many, many years, probably the authority in water in the Philippines. So, to introduce panel number 1, how to survive the coming water crisis. Our presenter is one of this country's leading experts on water. Again, Mr. Dondi Alikpala. Thank you, Dondi, for being here. He's the former administrator of MWSS. And he will join the panel with me and 3 more experts on water, namely Mon Fernandez, President and CEO of Maynilad Water Services, Engineer Dolores Hipolito from the Flood Control Management Cluster of DPWH, and Chris Ilagan with 3M, formerly Manila Water, principal author of the policy brief. So you have a lot of experts on this panel, and I'm sure it's going to be a very interesting discussion. Our moderator will be Patrick Cook, regional editor of Asia of the Oxford Business Group. The Oxford Business Group has been a media partner of the Arangkada Forum for several years and annually publishes a nearly 300-page report on the Philippines. On the other hand, EBBN, together with the ECCP, held the second Water Challenge Forum on August 30 in 2018, which highlighted the importance of cooperation between the public and private sector in attaining a sustainable water future. Water is essential for agriculture, environment, fishery, our households, industry, power generation, recreation, transportation, and the list goes on and on and on and on. Global water demand projections are estimated to increase by 55% in 2050. The Philippines, despite having twice the capacity or captive water availability of other Asian countries, experiences high water stress. And there's an index, there's a score of 3.01. In comparison, Laos is a landlocked country but has a very low water stress score of 0.01. Even Vietnam and Thailand, which have similar geography, population and GDP as the Philippines, experience only low to medium water stress of 1.01 to 1.7. So obviously it's a lot of work to be done when it comes to water and water sustainability in the Philippines. This is partly because Philippine water resources are poorly managed, resulting in polluted water bodies. According to DENR, out of the sampled 127 freshwater sources, only 47 proved to have satisfactory water quality. Additionally, only 10% of the country's wastewater is reported to have received primary treatment prior to being discharged in water bodies. Initiatives towards addressing the problems are fragmented and lack continuity. This is why, despite several initiatives since 1980s, the Department of Water remains to be a distant dream. And we have been teaming up with a number of different institutions and people. Tond is one of them, to try to form the Department of Water, but I'm sure you will touch on that subject a bit later. because if you look at the government at this point in time, everything has a department, just not water. And it is the most precious commodity we have. And if we can preserve water, we can preserve life. So I think it's about high time that we start to get our act together and form the Department of Water. It is my earnest wish that this forum can discuss ways in which the private sector and the government can address our common problems in water and coordinate our efforts in order to make something happen. And I'm sure our next speaker, Tondi Alikpala, will address those issues. So I would like to invite Tondi to the stage to be followed by a panel discussion. So maraming salamat po, please.
Gunther actually just summarized my entire presentation. Thanks, Gunther. So, shall we start? So, people always ask me, do we have enough water? We actually do have enough water, but we are still in a crisis. Next, please. Next. Next. So, McKinsey actually says that by 2030, we are going to be having major problems globally. We're going to be having bigger demand than we actually do have supply. But that's fresh water. Next, please. Next. Now, the Asian Development Bank, the World Economic Forum does this annual analysis of likelihood of tragedy and disaster and the impact it might have. Next, please. And what's interesting is that since 2012, we've seen water in the top 5 of risks in terms of impact. It has consistently been in the top 5 of all these studies since 2012. And the 2018 study just came out a couple of months ago, and water is still up there in the top 5. Are we prepared? That's, I think, the question we have to ask ourselves. Next, please. Next. The Asian Development Bank also did a study on how prepared countries are in terms of water security. They covered 5 areas. Household water security talks about if a household has access to water supply and sanitation. Economic water security talks about the availability of water for industry, agriculture, and energy, which is actually one of our biggest users of waters. The next one is the ability of a water utility or a local government to supply the necessary requirements in terms of water supply, sanitation, and even drainage issues. Environmental water security talks about how healthy our rivers are and to what extent are we doing to ensure the health of our rivers. And Gunther did say that, well, 8% or 52% of our waters are essentially biologically dead. The last one is how, in terms of risk, how prepared are we for droughts and floods as a country? Next, please. So the question is, how did the Philippines do? Next. In 48 countries, the Philippines ranked 38. There's really a lot for us to be, that is necessary to bring us up in the list. Next, please. One of the biggest problems we have next is that this article just came out a few days ago. There's insufficient water in certain instances in Region 3 for agriculture, which is just compounding all the problems we have today. Next. But also follows the problems we've been having almost every year. We're just consistently bombarded by disaster after disaster, and all of these have direct impacts on our water resources, and this impacts on energy, it impacts on agriculture, and it's this incredible domino effect. But we're really not doing anything about it in terms of water management. Next. Next. So climate change again compounds the issue. And what we're seeing is that with climate change, you're going to be seeing more intense typhoons, you're going to be seeing longer drought periods, and which will impact on hydropower, irrigation, and fisheries, industries, and municipal use. Incidentally, more water actually goes to industry than it does to all the water utilities combined. Next. Next. We're also going to be seeing more conflicts. Right now, we're seeing conflicts already between irrigation and hydropower, between irrigation and water supply, and between water supply and other users. And we're seeing conflicts between local governments who are trying to claim water as their own. Next, please. Next. A study made by the Ateneo's Manila Observatory also projected within the next, by 2050, we're going to be seeing rainfall increase as much as 44% in Luzon. While it might sound godsend that we're going to be having more water, it just means we're going to be getting more rainfall over a shorter period of time. And if we can't store that, we're going to be seeing more floods. And if we have a shorter period of rainfall, that means we're going to have longer drought or dry seasons. Next, please. Another problem is we're going to see rainfall decrease in Mindanao by about 35%. That's going to impact agriculture. That's going to impact hydropower. In terms of water supply and sanitation, next please, we're seeing that we are doing a study right now, and we see that less than 45% of our households actually have household connections. Most of Filipinos don't have water connections in their homes. Next, please. Next. And 14 million Filipinos don't have access to safe drinking water. Most of their sources are unsafe today. Next. Sanitation is still a continuing problem. Many households still practice open defecation. It also means they don't have access to toilets. If 4.23 is the national average, we're seeing high numbers in ARM, Region 5, and Region 8. Government's not really addressing this. While government might be looking at water supply because it operates at the utility level, there's still that sense that sanitation is supposed to be solved by homeowners. So utilities don't really get into that aspect of toilets and health. Next, please. Regardless, and because of that, however, we're seeing deaths. Filipinos still die from diarrhea. We still get people who die every day because of poor sanitation. Next, please. Next. Now, there's a study being done, a national study on sewerage and septage, and the study shows that 17.76% of the country is covered by septage, and sewerage is 12.85 nationally. I'm really skeptical with these numbers. I'm more inclined to slash these numbers in half to get a better coverage. In Metro Manila, I think we're looking at 14% in terms of sewerage. And if Metro Manila already covers about 20%, or well, Mega Manila covers about 20% of the country, we don't see sewer systems actually outside Metro Manila, which means the national numbers should be a lot lower than we have here. Nevertheless, even if these numbers are indeed true, it also shows there are a lot of opportunities for for businesses to get into the business of sewerage and sanitation. Unfortunately, the cost to get into sewerage and sanitation is higher than it is to water supply. The DPWH came up with a National Sewerage Sanitation Master Plan, which would allow LGUs that wanted to get into sewerage to secure grants from the national government, but there have been few and very little takers, unfortunately. Next, please. Next. One of the problems we have here is, we consistently hear there's so many agencies involved in water. They're involved in water supply and sanitation, in river basin management, data collection is all over the place, and we don't have data. Policy making is still unclear on who should do it. Agriculture, we have so many agencies. So we're seeing flood management and hydropower. Gunther did say that the list goes on and on issues related to water. And we're suffering, unfortunately, from the tragedy of the commons. With so many agencies involved in water, there's no agency responsible for water. Next, please. Next. And the problem, as somebody said, as it Biswas said, the problem actually is not scarcity. We do have the water. The problem is actually managing the water. Somebody's going to be talking about later, I think, well, not here, I'm sorry, about the Singapore model. Singapore, for example, doesn't have water to begin with. They don't have watersheds, but they've managed to provide water to a country that doesn't have water, but they've managed it really well. Next, please. Next. So there's no single agency today in this country with the responsibility of water. So there's now all this talk of the Department of Water. Next, please. Now, when we talk about water management, the model that we look at is something called Integrated Water Resources Management. IWRM looks at water from a holistic manner. Does do interventions in hydropower affect interventions in irrigation? Or can solutions be found for agriculture in the water supply or hydropower sector? Well, we have to look at it from a holistic perspective. But with all the agencies we have, everybody's looking at it in a silo basis, and we have to really get it all together. So, next, please. The institution, usually in many countries, to manage water is what we call the river basin. The light blue shaded area for you see on your left side of the screen is actually the Cagayan River Basin. It covers about 25,000 square kilometers. It traverses several provinces because really we cannot manage water on an administrative scale. It has to be done at a hydrological scale. Water doesn't recognize political boundaries. It doesn't recognize the power of governors and mayors. But we have to recognize the power of water. And we have to manage it from that holistic perspective. There are 429 river basins. There are very few river basin organizations. Perhaps the biggest model would be the Laguna Lake Development Authority. But we have to replicate this model all over the country, and we haven't done so. The role of the river basin allows resources to be used by the people in the river basin. It allows the people who live off the basin to manage their own basin. Right now, the whole country turns to agencies here in Quezon City for water that's supposed to be used in Mindanao and the Visayas and Luzon. Let the people who live off the basins manage their own water resources. Next, please. So we need to create more river basins. Next, please. And that's perhaps might be the role of the Department of Water. So, Mr. Alan Ortiz, we're looking now at the EPIRA for water, and that's the direction we're going here. But with the institutions necessary to make this happen are not in place. The Department of Water has to come in. We need to collect data, develop policies and regulations to really manage the water, our waters well. Next, please. We need to create an independent water regulatory commission to ensure that every Filipino has access to water supply and sanitation. There are about, I think, 4 or 5 agencies involved in the tariff regulation of water utilities. There are more than 24,000 utilities in the country compared to ERC. I think it's looking at less than 200 electrical cooperatives. There are more than 24,000 utilities around the country, and there's no agency responsible for that. So what we have are you have cooperatives and LGUs and water districts. Water districts are overseen by the Local Water Utilities Administration, or LUA. MWSS oversees Manila Water and Maynilad. And the LGUs are self-regulated. And we have so many benchmarking studies to show that unfortunately, they're also poorly run. The water districts are one of the better models we have in the country today. And now we're seeing an influx of private companies in the sector, which is actually a very welcome development because finally with private companies that have contracts to meet, there are milestones and targets that have to be met. Next, please. There's also discussion of a water apex body. A Department of Water, it might be asking too much for the Department of Water to cover all aspects of water, including irrigation and hydropower. So it's really looking at how we can manage water, but you still need to coordinate over a huge expanse of water players. And there's a discussion of, like we have in other countries, of developing a high-level, cabinet level of secretaries to coordinate at that level on what the policy should be for the management of water, for the Department of Water to undertake. Next, please. So this is a very rough structure of what we're going to be looking at over time. There are now there are pending laws for Department of Water. The Water Regulatory Commission has been pending in Congress since 2011. But I have to say it's only in the past 2 years that we're seeing a lot of attention now getting into water, and it's a welcome development. Next, please. Just, I think 2 weeks ago, the Speaker of the House announced that she's going to be promoting the creation of a Department of Water. We have to look at what that's going to look like. The Water Regulatory Commission bill has to be supported. And what's exciting is NEDA also commissioned the creation of Water Supply and Sanitation Roadmap, which has been submitted already to NEDA this month for approval, and which develops actually the strategic framework on how we should improve water supply and sanitation, taking into consideration finance and regulatory reforms and policies that need to be done. And I think that's the last of the slides. Next, please. With that, thank you very much, and I'm looking forward to the Q&A later on.
Thank you very much, our guest speaker, Mr. Alekpala. May we request you stay on stage to join the panel discussion. To moderate this esteemed panel, may we call on stage the Regional Editor for Asia of Oxford Business Group, Mr. Patrick Cook. May we also call on stage our panelists. First up, the President and CEO of Maynilad Water Services Incorporated and the President of the Management Association of the Philippines, Mr. Ramoncito Fernandez. Next is the Project Manager of the Flood Control Management Cluster of the Department of Public Works and Highways, Engineer Dolores Hipolito. And our third panelist is the Government Affairs and Markets Leader of 3M Philippines, Mr. Christopher Ilagan. And to complete the panel, may we call back on stage the President of the European Chamber of Commerce of the Philippines, Mr. Gunter Toss.
Okay, so this is the first panel of the day. It's quite dramatically titled, How to Survive the Coming Water Crisis. It might seem a little ironic to some people in the audience that we're talking about a water crisis, just as we're preparing for a super typhoon. But as we'll see, and as you mentioned in your speech, and as we'll talk about in the panel today, obviously climate change and extreme weather events are part of the challenges facing the sector. Now, we have 45 minutes or even 40 minutes because of time overruns at the moment. So I asked the panelists to be as concise as possible. And we have time at the end for an open forum, questions from the audience. You may approach the microphones all around the area here. So we'll go straight into it. Donde, I'd like to start with you. You gave us a great overview of the sector and the challenges facing water here in the Philippines. If we look, first of all, at infrastructure, I mean, mentioned a lot already is the Build, Build, Build program of the government at the moment. To what extent do you think the BBB initiative is sufficiently addressing the major infrastructure gaps in water and sanitation across the country?
Well, it's not sufficiently addressing the waters. We're not seeing, we don't have any build projects in the water sector. I think everyone's shaking their heads. And it's interesting, in the previous administration, Babe Singson, who was the water czar, and he came from Maynilad, and he was head of DPWH, he was actually saying, if the government can spend for roads and other infrastructure, why can't it spend for transmission of water or bulk water supply to our provinces? And that's something that should be explored because it will impact on several areas. One, it will allow fourth and fifth class municipalities that can't afford to develop their own water sources to be able to tap inexpensive water. And it'll help lower tariffs across the board for the entire country. So there has been no discussion on build for water, unfortunately.
And Chris, I mean, in your professional life, you have an interest in public-private partnerships. How do you assess the sort of attractiveness, really, of the PPP framework for enticing private participation in water infrastructure development?
Well, coming from one of the concessionaires, we actually do have I guess you can say, a good case study, right? That kind of gives a good sense of the potential of PPP. Unfortunately, I mean, we do have laws like the BOT law. There's a current law right now, the PPP Act, that they're pushing for in Congress, which would probably pave the way for I guess you can say, sort of legal framework that would maybe make water PPPs a bit more attractive. But there is a big role, I think. I mean, PPP will not solve all the water problems of the country, right? And I think that's where discussions on the GAA allocation for water, kind of going into what Dondi was talking about, that the government actually allocate for certain infrastructure projects that maybe the private sector would not fund because it's not commercially viable. There's also a role for official development agencies as well, right? And I think that's where the discussion on who should be financing what comes into question. And I guess the good thing about it is we do have NEDA today currently working on they actually have a unified financing framework for the water sector particularly. But I think it's still a framework, and it has to move into something very, something operational that can be acted on today, right? And basically saying these sorts of projects can be funded by PPP, right? Because it will attract the private sector. These ones require GAA allocations, and these ones require ODA. Unfortunately, what we see insofar as GAA is concerned is, I think right now it's about 5 billion currently allocated for the water sector, right? The gap, just to meet the minimum SDG goals by 2030, is an annual spend of 17 billion, right? Now that 5 billion, obviously there is that huge gap, and I'm sure it's a bit more than 5 billion that's being plowed into the water sector, but still not enough in order to meet the minimum SDG goal. And I say minimum because that's just about universal access, but that's universal access without considering resilience towards natural disasters, right? The effects of climate change, and that will require more. So there's still quite a bit of work, I think, insofar as, creating the right way of funding the entire water infrastructure program of the Philippines.
Yeah, Mon mentioned in his speech about ODA versus PPP, or ODA plus PPP. Chris, I mean, where do you stand on that? Would you like to see more of an ODA plus PPP shift?
I think you will need all the funding you can get. It's really a question of figuring out what should be funded by ODA and what should be funded by PPP. And obviously the private sector will be attracted to those ones that will have the returns required, right, of a typical private company. So there's a role for everything, right? And I guess it really requires somebody to facilitate the discussion on what should be funded by whom.
Gunter, moving on to maybe foreign participation. I mean, you obviously represent European business interests here in the Philippines. In what ways do you think opening up the sector to greater foreign participation and investment could alleviate some of the problems around water security here in the Philippines?
Okay, thanks. It's it's always a question of where do we start. If you look at the water sector, and I've lived here for 32 years, we have been involved in the water business, may it be a freshwater supply, may it be wastewater treatment. We do have a lack of, and that's why we have been very, very loud and noisy in trying to opening the construction industry to foreign participation, because that would be a first step to bring in technologies. While the government has always said, well, we need funding to bring in new technologies, I think that's a totally wrong approach. Open the country to foreign participation, and automatically the technology will be transferred here. And we work, when we're in the Philippines, we work with Filipinos, so automatically you transfer that know-how. So to me, it is important to open this industry, particularly this industry, because without water, as I said earlier, we cannot survive. So if we don't open this technology to foreign players, to new technologies, to new ideas, we will not survive. And I think most of the MEDP now, the Manila Water, they all work with foreign companies in order to bring new technologies in, because those are things we do not have in the Philippines, like it or not. So again, why buy technologies when you can bring them here without much spending much money, because the know-how will be transferred. And again, government needs to look at this very, very closely, because if you look at changes that happened and have happened in the past in the Philippines, it was usually privately driven, not government driven. At the same token, if you look at Boracay, why are we in the mess that we're into is, again, a government-made issue, because you issue permits to operate without really looking into the details. And now we are looking in Boracay, for instance, at a matter of that resort owners are harassed to tell and being told that for resorts with 10, 15, 20 rooms, they should put up their own STP. So again, it goes to show the lack of knowledge of the government agencies to understand what it takes to clean water and what it takes to supply water. And if just half of the figures that Dondi showed earlier are true, then you see the lack of proper wastewater treatment. We have a lack of freshwater supply. So those are all things that we need to address. And as Chris rightfully said, you know, with a budget of 5 billion, that is one STP, one larger STP. That's what 5 billion is. So you need to naturally increase the budgets and include that in build. And I still think the 17 billion annually that was mentioned earlier is still way too low if we want to catch up in the next 15 or 20 years. So we need to address this, because as I said earlier, without water we can't sustain life.
Dolores, if we look at the infrastructure when it comes to disaster preparedness, how do you assess the suitability of the nationwide infrastructure to cope with floods and extreme weather events that could affect the water supply here?
Well, aside from the increasing budget, I think if you will compare the budget of DPWH in flood infrastructures with the past decades, it has significantly increase. That means we have been putting more budget for infrastructure for flood disasters. We have also adopted many programs and strategies like river basin approach, wherein we put comprehensive infrastructure on a river basin scale. And we do have also upgrades on our design standards. So the new design standards were issued last 2015. So just for example, you may see so many urban areas upgrading the drainage culverts or the drainage conveyance infrastructure, because we are now requiring at least a 15-year design safety level. And we are also adopting many new technologies that could be in partnership with other functions in water resource management. For instance, we have started retarding basins, and we know that retarding basins could have other functions during non-flood time and during flood time too. You could attenuate the flow of the river by putting part of the flow there. And we have, because flood is not only caused by water alone, but sometimes it could be compounded with debris flow or sediment flow, and we have new technologies that are already part of our flood management programs, like the Sabo works, and yeah, so now DPWH is pursuing the master plan and feasibility of flood control and drainage projects on the principal rivers of the Philippines. But of course, we have to contend with priorities, and we have based that on a 2008 JICA study wherein we prioritized about 120 river basins for flood control.
Mon, coming to you, I mean, we spoke quite recently, and I know that you're quite passionate when it comes to climate change and the impact on the sector. I mean, to what extent is the climate unpredictability and the severity of phenomenons like La Nina and El Nino making it much harder to sort of plan and invest over the long term in water needs?
Thank you. Firstly, for clarity, whereas before I was speaking for and behalf of MAP, now I'm wearing my Maynilad hat. Yes, definitely incidents of El Nino and La Nina has been more frequent and more intense. And it has definitely affected raw water supply for starting with Metro Manila, where we are servicing. This has also highlighted the fact that Metro Manila, I don't want to scare you guys, but Metro Manila is 96% dependent on just one water source, the Angat water or system. What we have done in Metro Manila in coordination with MWSS is to develop alternative water sources outside of Angat. To name a few, we have developed, now MWSS has awarded finally the Kaliwa Dam as an ODA from China. And also, we have been tapping the Laguna Lake as a source for domestic water. This is part of the resiliency program that we have been working. Only last summer, this summer, there has been already some scarcity for Metro Manila in terms of water because of the drought, because of the dry spell. So aside from that, when the rains come, and we're expecting the rain again this weekend, the turbidity level, which is the measure of cloudiness or haziness of our water, has been increasing drastically. Whereas the norm before was 20 NTU, that's the measure of turbidity, it has now reached 1,800 NTU for the last 3 years. So what we have been doing in Metro Manila has been investing in a 3-year program to address, for our plants, treatment plants, to address this high levels of turbidity. So that is what our answer is to climate change. So we just need to invest further in making sure that we are ready for raw water variability.
Dolores, just to come back to you one more time on this climate change issue. How much importance or prominence do you think water stress and water security is given in the national discourse and planning around climate change adaptation? And is policy focused enough on long-term mitigation rather than crisis management?
Well, in some instances, maybe. For example, of course, I speak for flood management. We are looking at higher design safety levels. So when we do master plan, it should be for a 100-year flood. But of course, reality will tell us that you could only implement maybe for a 25-year flood first, then a 50-year flood at in phases or steps. But I would say that there are several policies that already addresses water security and stress in the country, and it's enshrined in so many plans and framework. So Philippine Development Plan already gears towards that. There are many pronouncements there, priority programs, and etc. We have the IWRM framework plan. We have the climate change adaptation framework. We have the disaster risk reduction management framework. So all of this already requires all development plans that should be integrating or mainstreaming this kind of policies in our actual plans. Maybe some problem only is in the operationalization of these framework plans at the local level. particularly because these concerns on water stress and security are best addressed using a river basin approach. But we all know that budgets and expenditures are not on a river basin approach, but like political and administrative boundaries, not the hydrological boundaries of a river basin.
Okay. I mean, let's talk a little bit about the structure of the sector then, Donde. I mean, in your presentation and in the policy brief, it's very clear that this fragmentation in the governance of water in the country is causing some problems. We said over 30 government agencies involved. You mentioned 24,000 utilities. What impact is this fragmentation having on the capacity of the sector to really improve water resource management?
I think that's one of the reasons we have all these problems today. It's because of all the fragmentation. So you have areas that are overly regulated, and you have areas where you might have several water utilities, for example, in the same area. And in many areas, there are just huge gaps happening in the areas. There's a big effort, for example, if you look at the panel to here, most of the discussion is on water supply and sanitation. Well, Mon, Chris, and Gunther. But that water supply and sanitation actually only covers about 7% of our water use. Industries, about 10%. But it's agriculture, and no one here represents agriculture, and that is almost 80% of our water is going to agriculture, and nobody's talking about that. Efforts to become more efficient in agriculture is not being discussed as well. So, and that's why we're really proposing that it be tackled from a more holistic perspective, because we expect to see synergies between the different users. We're now seeing waste to energy. We're seeing there's a lot of discussion on the water, energy, and food nexus, where you need a lot of energy for food production. You need a lot of water for food production. You need water for energy, and you need a lot of energy also now for pumping and water. So there's a lot of discussion in that area, but you have to tackle it holistically, and we should be more coordinating, and unfortunately we're not doing that.
Gunter, I mean, if we look at the fragmentation of the water system here in the country, how is this creating a lack of available data, basically, on the whole structure here in the Philippines? And how does that lack of data restrict long-term planning?
Well, if you look at Tondi's presentation earlier, when he presented 12%, he said, but likely it is only 6%. So yeah, the collation of data is certainly not where it's supposed to be. And again, if you use that as a starting point for your study, where do you start and where do you go? And again, even what Chris said, we need 17 billion in order to drive this forward annually. I think, again, if you take the 12%, that's probably right. But if you then take the right data, it's probably a lot higher. So to move forward in a structured way that makes sense and that you can budget it properly and that you can forecast it for the next 50 years. Data collection is essential, and there we really lag behind, and I think especially in the water business, because rightfully what Tondi said, you know, we talk about household water, we talk about sanitation, but what about industrial water? What about agriculture? And agriculture is obviously our biggest problem at this point in time, driving force for inflation and whatnot. So we need to look at this holistically, and holistic approach means you need to fall back onto data that have been collated for the last couple of years. And there is a major lack, and I think even in the floodwater control, I think we are lacking data, because in other countries, floodwaters can be stored and can be pumped out again afterwards. So yeah, I think it is essential that we also, on that part, start to get our act together, compile data properly so we have something to move forward in a very structured way to make sure that we do the right things at the right time and appropriate the right budgets. And again, it all boils down to management. Therefore, a Department of Water, or a body that regulates, that not regulates, but actually collates all this data and connects all the dots, is of utmost importance.
If we might get political for one moment, Mon, I'll ask you this question. Obviously, one of the hot political debates in the country at the moment is around the constitutional change a shift towards perhaps a more federal system. How do you think a federal system might impact the process of integrating water resource management in the country?
Firstly, there are still a lot of information and clarification and debate going on the draft federal form of government. So my only input to that question is to reiterate the point earlier raised by Dondi, that water cuts across political boundaries and should not be managed as a political resource or even much so a personal resource.
I mean, Chris, how confident are you that any sort of drawing of political boundaries would also take into account hydrological boundaries?
Ideally, that would be the case. We know that though administrative boundaries exist today and what have you, it's really going into this whole river basin concept that Dondi touched on earlier, which, you know, you may have different political entities and subunits within a river basin, right? But at the end of the day, as long as you take a participatory approach to the governance over the water resources in that sector, right? Ideally, you're able to create then a strategic roadmap on how you're going to allocate that water across the various uses. So, you know, in going to what Mon was touching on earlier, in the context of federalism, right? Ideally, that will at least be taken into account, but ultimately, we have to make sure that the discussions do happen, right? That these are taken up alongside the federalism discussion as that happens.
And Chris, you were involved in drawing up the policy brief that was the basis of the discussion today in many ways. One of the key recommendations was the speedy enactment of a law to harmonize and streamline governance in the sector. Do you detect the political will to prioritize water sector reform and set strict timelines to do this?
Dondi touched on a point, or he raised a point earlier, that at least the speaker recently did file a bill for a Department of Water, right? Which is one component of that larger structure that Dondi was talking about. The Water Regulatory Commission probably reached its peak of policy dialogue during the last Congress. What's nice about it is, in the context of water sector reform in general, it can come back on the table, right? And so if we're going to talk about Department of Water, we might as well talk about the Water Regulatory Commission and the apex body. And I think in terms of political will, what we have going for us right now, I think I bumped into him earlier, Secretary Ernie Ordonez actually is here, and he is spearhead, he's the lead convener for a legislative, executive, private sector National Water Summit, where we do hope to get the endorsement of President Duterte himself to focus on the reforms needed for the water sector. And I understand from Ernie when I bumped into him earlier that November 21 is the date that they're hoping to have this summit. Ideally, if you look at our policy brief, we did plug in also the appointment of a water czar. And this is really meant to shepherd, right, the whole reform process, because we know it's not going to happen overnight. But if you don't, in the absence of somebody at a senior enough government level to push this, right, and if you're just going to make it a secondary assignment, most likely it will not receive that push that's needed. And so hopefully in that summit, that will come out. And you really need somebody to spearhead the effort. Otherwise, we will continue with a very fragmented approach to trying to reform the sector, which we know has not worked over the past couple of decades.
Donde, back in 2011, President Aquino did appoint a water czar, and there was a study with the World Bank, a lot of recommendations. Ultimately, it came to nothing. Why would it be different this time, do you think?
Well, why didn't it work before? I mean, we had a water czar. We don't have a water czar today. You're putting me on spot. No, well, I think there's more political will. NEDA already has been very serious about developing a master plan a strategic plan. And it was great because everybody was talking about laws, 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 but nobody had really taken a step back and to see what institutions are necessary or what laws are necessary to fit into a strategy. And there was no strategy to speak of. People had started looking at the water code and looking at provisions of the water code without seeing the big picture. So NEDA has stepped back, looking at the big picture, and they're now recommending the financial requirements to make these things happen. You actually touched on that earlier, and they're looking at which utilities, for example, should be accessing commercial loans or getting to PPPs, what format should be for development loans, and those who should be entitled to grants. So this is part of an entire big strategy, and it's very clear now what kind of institutions that need to come into place, what kind of policies need to come into place, and what kind of laws we need to put into place to make all this happen. We didn't have that in the last administration.
Dolores, just to touch on it from a sort of flood mitigation and preparedness perspective, how would it benefit from an integrated water management system in terms of planning?
How? I think many activities in the basin are actually drivers of flood disasters. So from unregulated land use, you have many watershed management activities, even along the different channels. So if there is integrated water resource management, it could really help in putting the appropriate mitigating measures. One thing also is that when you do the prediction for climate change on a river basin approach, you could look at the change in water resource in that basin, as well as the climate-related risk. So then all the other sectors could be, converging on appropriate solutions. So particularly for flood, it will be best for us to know what are the different activities and that actually directly drives or triggers the different flood disasters.
Okay, Mon, coming to you, one of the recommendations in the policy brief and from the roundtable in January was also around improving water coverage and quality. And in that is the idea of a water regulatory commission. It was mentioned before in the presentation as well. So if we're looking at sustainable development in the sector, how important is it for the regulator to establish a tariff regime that offers fair pricing that also reflects the cost of service delivery?
Well, first I'd like to state that PPP on Manila, on the Metro Manila water sector continues to be a model in Asia. Imagine if President Ramos in the late 90s did not embark in this privatization, you will still have the problem in BF Parañaque, wherein water will be delivered in drums and 5 times the cost of which it is now. But having said that, the water sector in Metro Manila alone needs still billions of pesos to continue to provide the service obligations that it has to its customers, both in clean water and also in wastewater and sewerage management. So with investments in more reservoirs, more pumping stations, and more treatment plants, and wastewater treatment plants, the requirement really is that we continue to invest. And I'd like to remind everyone that we all agree that access to water is a right, but it is also an economic good, and it must be properly priced.
Okay. Yeah, at the moment we have the unified financing framework for water supply and sanitation that's been driven by NEDA. Chris, how important is it for this to be implemented immediately, and what role do you see for private funding alongside ODA and government funds?
Well, we did touch on it a bit earlier. I guess just to restate that this has to, ideally we're implementing it now. That basically, although I know NEDA is working on a master plan, that would help insofar as figuring out where the investments are needed and which ones can, for example, be funded by private sector. And the nice thing about getting private sector involved is then you're at least able to reallocate some of that public funding to other, whether it be other water infrastructure that maybe the private sector will not fund, or other social infrastructure, right? Or other hard infrastructure in the case of roads and bridges. So, you know, it's basically, what I would do is, where is there commercial viability? Figure out how to put those under PPP regime, right? Figure out which of those infrastructures are required, but the private sector will not fund. That's maybe where GAA can come in. And for any gaps of GAA, that's where you figure out where ODA would come in, right? But you know, ideally, this is happening alongside the finalization of that master plan that Dondi's been talking about. Again, that's only water supply and sanitation, so you do need the discussion to rise up to the level of actually an integrated water discussion, right, which cuts across all the various uses.
Yeah, one of the final recommendations in the policy document and in the roundtable from January was around expanding wastewater treatment coverage. We've already touched on it a little bit. And Donde, you made some quite eye-opening observations around sanitation access across the country. Now, obviously, wastewater is a very costly endeavor. What are some of the most cost-effective solutions, do you think, for expanding sanitation coverage to households across the Philippines?
Well, we came up with two terms, sewerage and septic management. Septic management is really managing septic tanks. Right now, you have most of your septic tanks are dislodged. If it's full, if it's clogged, and it's probably thrown in the river without treatment. Now, Manila Water putting treatment plants to allow these to be treated. The cost of a sewer system might be anywhere 3 to 4 times the cost of putting up a water system, but it's very efficient, and it's certainly more effective. A septage system, at best, without the interceptor system, is may be able to clean up to 30% of the pollutants, but it's also a fraction of the cost. So what we're seeing right now outside Metro Manila is the turn to look at septage systems. I mean, it's not 100%, you'll get maybe a 30% reduction in pollutants, but it's a lot better than zero. And it's a very viable system. So LGUs should be able to, and there are a lot of LGUs jumping on the septage bandwagon. We're actually grateful to what happened to Boracay because it's raised the level of awareness on the need to really do something about our wastewater. And right now, most of the LGUs are looking at septage.
Mon, I mean, you also mentioned Boracay earlier. I think Boracay and perhaps Manila Bay are two of the most well-publicized examples of water pollution in the Philippines, also known internationally. Now, Boracay, decisive action was eventually taken. Manila Bay, there's been quite long drawn-out efforts to clean up Manila Bay. So what lessons do you think can be learned from the efforts to address the water pollution in these two areas?
Well, aside from climate change and the rising population and industrialization, it's pollution that affects clean water sustainability. And having said that, we have seen how our garbage was thrown back after storms into Rojas Boulevard. So, in fact, also a study by Greenpeace has mentioned that 48% of water pollution is caused by domestic waste. And therefore, the need to really invest some more on sewerage systems and septage sanitation systems. And for Metro Manila alone, the two concessionaires, with approval of the MWSS, will be spending at least 150 billion in the next 10 years on sewerage and sanitation for Metro Manila alone.
Chris, what role do you see for technological innovation, new technological advancements in expanding sanitation coverage and wastewater treatment in a cost-effective manner that will not perhaps involve unaffordable tariffs for households and consumers?
You take a look at the policy brief. That actually did come up as one of the recommendations. And it was actually incorporated because during the roundtable back in January, a DOST, right, representative that kind of highlighted the fact that we actually have invested, right, the Department of Science and Technology has invested in research and development in the area around both water and wastewater technologies that can be indigenously, developed, right, further. And so I think, I'm not an expert insofar as technological interventions are concerned, but the fact that we actually have resources locally trying to figure out what technologies can be used within the local setting means that, it tells me that there has to be a dialogue between the academe, right? The academe that's actually working on these things, along with our scientists in DOST, with private sector, with the utilities, with our water, our irrigation users, right? That needs to happen. And I just guess, what I see a lot of is foreign technology as well. I mean, foreign technology, obviously the fact that it's there is something that we should be looking into. But locally, right, how do we capitalize on all that research that's been done using taxpayers' money to actually develop these, right? And considering that they're looking at indigenous solutions using indigenous materials would likely also potentially mean more affordable technologies, right? But I probably leave it at that, and I just hope that they do join the policy dialogue insofar as water sector reform is concerned. They have a big role that they can potentially play there.
And time is ticking down, which is quite appropriate for maybe the title of this panel, How to Survive a Coming Water Crisis. Gunther, I'd like to give perhaps the last word to you. How much time do we really have left to preempt this coming water crisis in terms of meaningful policy actions and infrastructure investments? And how confident are you that the political will and the urgency exists to really tackle this problem?
Let me quickly add something to what
Sure.
Chris said. We have been working with DOST in Cebu very closely to look at indigenous ways of cleaning up water. One of them is bamboo. There's several models around wherein resorts actually use bamboo to clean up their wastewater, and you get tertiary water out of it. So there are means and ways, and we have been exploring it, and we are looking into it together with DOST for a project that is very close to my heart, because I said there must be means and ways to grow bamboo and utilize the technology. So we're working with a group in Pantayan to produce straws out of bamboo that you can grow with using wastewater. So there's a number of things that are ongoing in the country, not that will solve our problem on a larger scale, but if we start breaking it down on a smaller scale, then it's probably workable. And it takes, again, what you said earlier, it takes political will to support that, but DOST actually does that on a small scale, and hopefully we'll be able soon to replicate it on a bigger scale. As to how confident we are and how much time there is, we have run out of time, basically. It is not only 5 minutes before 12, but it is 12 already. So if we don't act now, we will not get over the finishing line. That is one thing for sure. Is the political will here? I think political will is always coupled with probably private investment, which sometimes, especially on the wastewater sector, is very difficult, but I'm sure Mon can see much more to that, because there's no such thing as wastewater fees. You tuck that into the freshwater supply because the laws are inadequate. But again, a good old Filipino saying is never give up hope. So we hope and we work diligently towards solutions to address all these issues, and I think you have very powerful people here that can make a difference and that have been working towards a solution to make the difference. So I think we should all roll up our sleeves and get to work and make sure that we put the right policy in place, that we put everything there, proper framework, political will, and involve the private sector, and I'm sure we can get over the finishing line.
Okay, excellent. Well, I think we timed that perfectly, actually. So thank you very much for your very concise, insightful comments. We'll now open it up to the audience. So if you have a question, you may approach one of the microphones.
Yes, I have a question. Is this directed to Gunther? I'm the Secretary General of the National Roadmap and Summit coming on November 21. And I take the question what is the role of foreign chambers? And I'd like to make an announcement, and I want Gunther to answer. We are running a very tight ship, so we have 6 departments for the conveners, the Senate, the House, and 2 private sector organizations. But now that we have time, we have 2 months left, I want to ask Gunther if he's willing to step up to the challenge. I'm not the convener. The convener would be the Senate, the House, 6 departments, and 2 private sector organizations. I want to expand that, the 2, to include recently we're asking MEP and Alliance, but I want to ask the foreign chambers because it is Gunther's ECCP that has said 3 annual water challenges. It is Arangkada that is doing a lot of work here, fantastic. So I'd like Gunther to ask him this. Between now and November 22, incidentally, I'm leaving build to go to water. I was the president of Cement for 12 years and ASEAN president of Cement. I'm full-time from build to water. Gunther, are you willing to now not only talk like this, but get involved in the working group between now and November 21, so that that summit, where we expect President Duterte to come, that summit will be much more enriched by the role and wisdom of the foreign chambers. Can you do that? Can you commit to that?
Ernie, you took 1 minute of my time, and we've been working on this together for quite some time already. We've made some headways, and yes, you have all the chambers aligned with all your views, with all your visions. Again, we need to have political will in order for us to help. I see the Danish ambassador smiling at me because I know the Danish government has money sitting there waiting to be invested, but we cannot because you do not allow foreign corporations to come in directly. So again, let's address the political issue and then we address the rest. But you have our wholehearted support, 100% to go the right way to make a difference. And I see John nodding, I see Mr. Payne nodding, so everybody's on the same page. Yes, we are there to help, so let's get our act together and work together.
So please don't be shy. If you have a question, just approach one of the microphones. You just need to mention your name and your affiliation.
My name is Esteban Silva. I'm a retiree. I'm here for mental gymnastics and knowledge of the country. Question is for Manila Water. According to MJ Hammer on water and wastewater managed technology, for every population of 1,000, there should be 100 sampling positions for coliform in the distribution system. I understand MWSS totally has only about a little less than 2,000. In a population of Manila of 10 million, that should be 10,000 sampling points. This is in the book of MJ Hammer, published in the John Wiley and Company, 1977. And the second was taken up about federalism. During the British period of colonialism, water was allocated for Egypt at 80% of the Nile River. At the time of Nasser, it was again confirmed 1953. Now, recently, Ethiopia has built a huge dam, the largest in Africa, and Egypt had threatened to bomb because Ethiopia wants to have their own development, and so did Sudan and all the areas from where the Nile comes from Uganda. Would you comment on that? But the important one is MWSS. Does it have 10,000 sampling point tests in the distribution system, not at the source? Thank you.
Thank you for your question, sir. The short answer to your long question is simply that we in Metro Manila with MWSS and Manila Water, we guarantee safe and potable water at the before the meter of your household.
And would someone like to answer the point made on federalism as well? There was a second point of the question, I think, on federalism.
This is not the political forum. Let's not talk about
Okay.
federalism. Let's talk about water, I guess, yeah?
Okay. Well, the time is up anyway, so thank you very much. Thank you for all the panelists. We really appreciate it.
Many thanks to everyone who joined our panel discussion today and shared their interesting thoughts about water. May we ask for the whole panel to stay on stage for a quick photo opportunity. While the speakers are having their photos on stage, we would just like to encourage everyone to actively participate in our ongoing discussions, especially the open forum. May we also invite you to tweet about the event using the event hashtag Arangkada Fora 2018, and also please connect with us on Facebook and LinkedIn. Please also don't forget to complete and submit your evaluation forms. We would like to thank our sponsors and partners. Bronze sponsors, patron sponsors, supporting partners, exhibitors, connectivity partner, wine partner, venue partner, table sponsors, and of course, our partners from the media. Lastly, we are inviting you to check out the booth of the Terra Mag Publishing and learn more about the proceeds from the Marawi and Beyond, the Joint Task Force Marawi Storybooks and CD music album Ala Ala sa Marawi. The sales proceeds will be given to the dependents of our fallen heroes, personnel wounded in action during the Marawi crisis, and the enhancement of the research capability of the Philippine Army. After the program, may we invite everyone to stay to join us at the networking cocktails at the foyer and exhibition area. To introduce the next panel entitled Competitive Rail and Highway Networks, may we please call on stage the President of the Japanese Chamber of Commerce and Industry of the Philippines Incorporated, Mr. Naoto Tago.
Good morning, everyone. Distinguished delegates, government and media guests, partners, ladies and gentlemen, I'm honored today to introduce panel 2, Competitive Rail and Highway Networks. You should have a copy of policy brief number 8 called Road and Rail in your delegate kit 1. Encourage you to skim through it as you follow the panel discussion also. Biographs of the panel are included in the souvenir program. We are very privileged to have 2 senior expert guests from the Philippine government to inform us about major road and rail projects. So very urgently needed to modernize the country's transportation infrastructure. DPWH Undersecretary for Planning and PPP, Maria Catalina Cabral will speak first. We welcome her back to JFE event. Undersecretary Cabral will be followed by DOTR Undersecretary for Rail Timothy Batan. We thank him for participating in our Road and Rail Roundtable. Former experts on road and rail are one the panel. Mr. Jun Mango, General Manager, Philippine National Railways. Attorney Philip Lanada, General Counsel, Light Rail Manila Corporation. Mr. Lau Lomlo, CFO, San Miguel Holding Corporation. And Mr. Yoshio Wada, Chief Representative, JICA Philippines. Our moderator is Mr. Coco Alcuas, Executive Director of the Makati Business Club. Coco has moderated several times at past Arangkada Fora, and we welcome him for back. As the first developing economy, the Philippines has severe challenges to create efficient modern land transportation network. We estimate that within a decade, over 1 million new vehicles will be placed on the country's road every year. This does not include motorcycles, which will increase to between 2 and 3 million a year. This number twice last year's big volumes. My country, Japan, has 10,000 kilometers of expressways. The Philippines has 400 kilometers. Malaysia has 1,800 kilometers. The Philippines has only 77 kilometers of operating railway, including the 3 urban light rail lines in Metro Manila. This gives you an idea of how much more needs to be built. Does this mean Armageddon is inevitable? That Manila and other cities could become uninhabitable? No, it does not. What it means is that no prevent such dismal scenarios. The country will need thousands of kilometers of expressway and rail line, equal to Malaysia and Thailand. It will require a robust network of rail line in the Manila region and Cebu, and also more bridges crossing river and bays and between islands, as well as better RORO. Our policy brief, which is co-sponsored by 70's leading business group, lists a substantial number of expressway, rail, and bridges projects underway, soon to begin, and being planned. This is very encouraging, but will be it enough? Are the government targets to complete so many big projects in just 4 more years in 2022 realistic? Lengthy bureaucratic approval, including by foreign donors and through right-of-way acquisition, still delays the completion of most projects. Nevertheless, we are optimistic that government plan will progress and recommendations made in the policy brief will be implemented. The country needs build, and more. Now, I'd like to invite Undersecretary Carver to the stage to be followed by Undersecretary Batam and the panel discussion. So can I invite Undersecretary Carver?
Good morning. I'm Undersecretary Maria Catalina Cabral of the Department of Public Works and Highways. I'm in charge of the Planning and Public-Private Partnership of DPWH. I'm here to present to you the program of the Department of Public Works and Highways, providing connectivity to increase competitiveness as we work for better infrastructure for a strong economy. Let me start with the basic DPWH mandate. Public Works and Highways, the department is mandated to undertake the planning and design, construction, and maintenance of national roads and bridges, flood control, water resources projects, and other infrastructure. But basically, with that, the length of the national roads of the country is around 32,868 kilometers, which is roughly less than 15% of the Philippine entire road network. We have around 8,260 bridges, totaling with a total length of 367,864 meters. As of December 2017, the condition of the Philippine road network is shown in the screen. I mentioned that the national road totals around 32,868 kilometers in length, 94% or roughly 95% of which are already paved. Our national road is actually divided into three class or category. We have the primary road, mainly the north-south backbone and the east-west lateral. Then we have the secondary road and the tertiary road. As I said, 95% of the national road network have already been paved, but the bulk of the Philippine road network are local roads. They are classified into provincial road, municipal road, city road, and the bulk are the barangay roads, or what we popularly know as the farm-to-market roads. And the percentage paved or the paved road ratio is quite low along the local roads. As of December 2017, the percentage paved length of local roads in the country is only around 18 to 19% of the entire 177,595 kilometers of local road. On the national bridges, we have 8,260, but many of this, about 99% of this, are already actually permanent bridges. These are the ones along the national road. In DPWH, we have our own performance governance system strategy map, and we have updated our scorecard in line with our commitment anchored on the Philippine Development Plan and the Ambisyon Natin 2040, which is our contribution to the betterment of the life of the Filipino family. The branding of DPWH is captured in our Concreto 2022, which set out three major outcomes that shall be our contribution to achieving the Sustainable Development Goals intended to improve the life of every Filipino, and that is reduction of travel time, improving the quality of the roads, especially on safety, and protecting the lives and properties because of natural disasters. In the last World Economic Forum Global Competitiveness Report, our ranking remains the same. Out of 137 countries, we were ranked 104 from the last rating of the Global Competitiveness Report. This is, well, an upgrade, just an upgrade from the last ranking we had in 2016 to 2017, where we were ranked at 106 out of 138 countries. The index ranking at 3.1 remains the same for the two ranking period. If you go by 1 being extremely underdeveloped to 7, meaning extensive and efficient by international standards, the ranking of the Philippines at 3.1 remains to be challenging and much needs to be done. The Public Works and Highways remains to be the biggest infrastructure agency of government. This year, 2018, for the first time in the history of government, Public Works and Highways received the biggest budget among all national government agencies, even bigger than the Department of Education. Well, of course, education remains to be a priority of government, and that's why in 2019, DPWH received the second highest budget, will receive the second highest budget after the Department of Education. You can see on the screen the budget of DPWH, which has received significant increases over the last 2017 to 2018. We receive an increase of about 43% from what we got in 2017. Mainly, we are implementing highway projects, flood control, and other infrastructure like school buildings from the Department of Education, and farm-to-market roads from the budget of the Department of Agriculture. Let me now cite to you the various programs of DPWH to better increase competitiveness by providing connectivity. First, we have our Convergence and Rural Road Development Program, where we aim to construct and build local access road to designated tourism destinations based on the master plan of the Department of Tourism or their National Tourism Development Plan. Here we identified, together with the Department of Tourism, various local roads. We also are improving access to RORO ports, seaports, and airports that are being built by the Department of Transportation. Together with the Department of Trade and Industry, under our Roll It program, or Roads Leveraging Linkage to Industry and Trade, we identified roads, local roads, leading to industrial zones, economic zones, industrial trade corridors, manufacturing areas, to support the logistics, especially those that would create jobs and opportunities, because this is where the industries are. I mentioned already the Roll It, the Roads Leveraging Linkages for Industry and Trade. Let me highlight the program by saying that the local access roads that we identified under this were culled out from the plan of DTI based on their priority industry and services. Let me mention some of these industries and services that are priorities of DTI. For example, automotive and auto parts, aerospace parts, chemicals, shipbuilding, furniture and garments, tools and dye, BPO, transport and logistics, construction sites, and tourism destinations. These priority industries remain to be our focal priority locations or hubs, where we identified so that it will further fuel high growth of domestic investment. We want to build better access towards these industries. And by providing better infrastructure, we will be able to create more industries outside the urban areas, creating more jobs and income opportunities to more Filipinos. A total of 2,790 kilometers of roads were identified under this program. And as of 2018, we were able to appropriate around 12.5 billion pesos for this program alone, with the intention of constructing and upgrading around 438 kilometers of access roads leading to eco-zones, industries and trade, and manufacturing sites. Under the Tourism Road Infrastructure Program, we partnered with the Department of Tourism. We started this since 2012, where based on their National Tourism Development Plan, we crafted a framework and defining the logical and spatial framework to link tourism gateways. This is aligned with the strategic direction of the Department of Tourism to provide access and connectivity to tourism gateways, service centers, and tourism sites. From 2016 to 2018, we allocated 66 billion pesos to build, rehabilitate, and upgrade around 2,700 kilometers of roads, local roads, leading to tourism destinations. This will continue as a priority program of the Department of Public Works and Highways. We also are aiming to build livable, sustainable, and resilient communities. But let me highlight those that are contributing to connectivity. Mainly, our program to rehabilitate retrofit, strengthen existing bridges, providing access to highly vulnerable areas. As we speak, government and DPWH in particular are already prepositioning our equipment and in preparation for the, well, projected coming of the strong typhoon, Ompong. We want to improve the roads, especially those that are vulnerable to flooding, landslide, and slope failure. We are also building evacuation centers. On top of that, we are also supporting facilities for marginalized sectors such as senior citizens, the physically challenged persons, and also catering to the women's sector. We want to build more bike lanes. We are incorporating bike lanes and facilities and pedestrian infrastructure into our new road construction. In addition to the existing 30 bridges in Metro Manila that are crossing Pasig River, Marikina River, and Mangahan Floodway, I mentioned to you that we want to rehabilitate, construct more bridges across Pasig River and Marikina River. We are also going to rehabilitate and strengthen 3 existing bridges, no? On top of building 12 new bridges. Let me probably, I think I have some examples later on. Let me mention to you some of the new bridges that are going to be built under the Metro Manila Logistic Improvement Program. For example, we're starting construction this year of 2 bridges, one in Manila, and that is the one connecting Binondo and Intramuros Bridge, and the other one in Makati connecting Mandaluyong, and this is the Estrella Pantaleon Bridge. We have already started constructing this year Santa Monica Loton Bridge, and that's the one crossing Makati and Pasig. Next year, we were going to start rehabilitating 2 important bridges, and these are Guadalupe Bridge in EDSA and Lambingan Bridge in Santa Ana, Manila. These bridges are old bridges. These are more than 50 years old. These are already due for rehabilitation and strengthening. We are now coordinating with local government units, particularly those that are traversing EDSA, and with the Metro Manila Development Authority for the traffic management plan. Because of course, as we know, even without constructing or anything, any ongoing construction along EDSA, it's already creating traffic. So we are making sure that we will maintain the same number of lanes open at any time during the rehabilitation of Guadalupe Bridge in EDSA. I mentioned to you that we are incorporating already bike facilities, especially with our construction of new road projects. Let me mention to you some. We are including bike lanes in Laguna Lake Highway, in Bacolod Negros Occidental Economic Highway with a 2-way bike lane, meaning both lanes, and in the Davao City Coastal Road Project. These mega projects or these flagship projects have already considered in the design and budget the construction of bike facilities to encourage use of non-motorized vehicles. Next slide. In our traffic decongestion program, we are implementing based on master plans and going to construct high-standard highways and expressways, widening of existing national roads and bridges, recovering our right-of-way. Remember R10? We were able to recover the R10 from a lot of informal settlers and obstructions. We intend to recover existing right-of-way by strictly enforcing the law, of course, together with the local police and MMDA. We are also building bypasses and diversion roads in congested areas where widening is no longer possible because it's more expensive to pay for acquiring the right-of-way, demolishing existing structures, rather than building along new alignments. We are also building flyovers in urban centers, interchanges, and underpasses. We have our High Standard Highway Network Master Plan, and we are now currently updating this with assistance from JICA. The government will continue to implement the master plan on High Standard Highway Network Development Program, which we originally formulated back in July 2010, with the aim of decongesting traffic, especially on urban areas and highly traveled corridors. Of course, expanding the expressway network will definitely hasten economic development because we are avoiding over-concentration of these socio-economic activities in Metro Manila and other urban areas to eventually diminish the economic disparities across the country if we want to improve and develop regional economy. We have the Philippine High Standard Highway Network, and under this network, we have identified three flagship or three priority highway network. In Luzon, we have the Luzon Spineway Highway Network or Expressway Network with a total length of 884 kilometers, projecting a cost of 424 billion pesos. Going to Visayas, we have the Cebu High Standard Highway Network with a total length of 73 kilometers and a project cost of 28 billion pesos. And in Mindanao, we have the Davao High Standard Highway Network with a total length of 86 kilometers and a total project cost of 65 billion pesos. Let me show you a little bit more detail on this three high standard expressway network. Luzon Spine Expressway Network is our flagship project, which aims to reduce travel time from Ilocos region from in the north to Bicol region in the south, from your usual 90 to about 20 hours travel time to just about 8 hours and 15 minutes. How can we do that? We have already several expressways ongoing, and we have identified those that will ensure connectivity from Ilocos all the way to Bicol. The last bastion is the Quezon-Bicol Expressway, which is now undergoing feasibility study by the DPWH. So, many of these are going to be finished by 2022. Let me cite to you some. The Skyway would be finished next year. We have the connector. We are expanding the NAIA Expressway towards Bonifacio Global City. Cavite-Laguna Expressway is going to be finished on or before 2022. We have just awarded an original proponent status for the Cavite-Tagaytay-Batangas Expressway. We are starting to acquire the right-of-way for the Toll Road 4, which is the extension of the South Luzon Expressway. We're now reviewing the extension of T-Plex, which were the original section will be finished by next year, and there's already a proposal to extend this all the way to San Juan La Union. So, and maybe we can probably move again towards Ilocos. With our integrated and seamless transport system, we are focusing particularly on supporting Mindanao by way of Mindanao Infrastructure Logistic Network and building roads linking the growth corridors in Western Mindanao, and also building inter-island linkage projects. So we have identified the projects that would fall under this program. For example, under the Mindanao Road Development Network Program, 2,600 kilometers of road network in Zamboanga Peninsula have been identified for construction and improvement, and growth corridors in Zamboanga are being supported now, Zamboanga Peninsula are being supported now by the Asian Development Bank under their program Improving Growth Corridors in Mindanao Road Sector. This have already started, and these are also planned to be finished by 2022. We are also supporting ARM, the Autonomous Region for Muslim Mindanao, by developing and upgrading primary access roads that will connect the ARM to the other regions in Mindanao, supporting the development objectives, especially in conflict-affected areas. This program consists of about 150 kilometers of road network, comprising of 6 major roads and missing links, and construction of 40 bridges along this road. With a total estimated cost of 24 billion pesos, we are now being supported by JICA to finish the feasibility study so that we can submit this to NEDA, if not latter part of this year, early part of next year. I mentioned to you our inter-island linkage mega bridge program, which comprises of several bridges or several bridge projects that aims to connect the islands of the country. We are an archipelago. We want to connect the major islands by building a series of short and long span bridges. Mentioning some of them, for example, ongoing right now is the Pangil Bay Bridge in Mindanao, connecting Misamis Occidental and Lanao del Norte. This is supported by the Korean government through KDCF, and this has a length of 3.7 kilometers that will cover deep bodies of water. Under the Mega Bridge program, we also finished the feasibility study for Panay, Guimaras, Negros, a 19-kilometer bridge that will connect the 3 islands of Panay. Of course, these are major tourism destinations. Panay with, of course, Boracay there, Iloilo there, Guimaras with the sweetest mango, and Negros, which is the sugar capital of the country. So the bridge is very important to provide connectivity to these 3 major islands. Davao-Samal Bridge that will connect Davao to the island garden city of Samal in Mindanao is a 4.4 kilometers bridge. The feasibility study is also finished. We are seeking foreign expertise to design and help us build these bridges. Other bridges in the pipeline includes Bataan-Cavite Link Bridge, Luzon-Samar Link Bridge, the 4th Mandaue-Mactan Bridge, Cebu-Bohol Link Bridge, Leyte-Surigao Link Bridge, Negros Cebu Bridge, and 3 bridges in Tawi-Tawi, and 3 bridges in Tawi-Tawi. So those are in the priority plan and program of DPWH. With that, again, DPWH are finishing many of these projects by 2022. Some of them will spill over because they are still in the feasibility study stage. We hope that with providing connectivity, transport costs will be reduced, thereby improving the economic life of every Filipino. With that, thank you in behalf of DPWH.
Thank you very much. Undersecretary Cabral, kindly stay on stage to join the panel discussion. May we now call on the moderator for this panel discussion, the Executive Director of Makati Business Club, Mr. Coco Alquaz. Our first panelist is the CEO of the Philippine National Railways, Mr. June B. Magno. Next is the General Counsel of the Light Rail Manila Corporation, Attorney Philip Ranada. And our third panelist is the Chief Finance Officer and Treasury Head of San Miguel Holdings Corporation, Mr. Raul Eduardo C. Romulo.
Good morning. Good morning. We're supposed to be joined by 2 other panelists, but they're likely not to make it. There's supposed to be a representative from JICA. That's Mr. Yoshio Wada. He might actually arrive, and if he does, he will be joining us. We're also supposed to be joined by the Transport USEC, Timothy Batan, but we understand he's still in Congress, and given the state of our transport, I doubt if he will make it here in time. Okay, you know, we heard all, I mean, I don't know how many of you read the Arangkada paper, the briefer, and certainly the Undersecretary's presentation was very comprehensive. I'd like to start with the Undersecretary. You've been in the department you've been in the department a long time. You're not a political appointee. Your career, 30 years. You don't look like 30 years in the department. How much confidence do you have that confidence do you have that the plans that you say will be finished by 2022, how high is your confidence in that?
Of course, that's a marching orders, but confidence-wise, I think we are confident because now we have the budget, we have the master plan, and we have decisive leaders to push. And the good thing is that the agencies are coordinating, talking closely, working closely together, especially in urban areas like Metro Manila. So together with DOTR and MMDA, we are making sure that especially on challenges like right-of-way acquisition, interfacing of infrastructure, especially in areas where there are projects that are pipeline under DOTR and DPWH, we have to make sure that this can coexist and the implementation will not hamper one over the other.
When you talked about agencies coordinating with each other, during your presentation you also talked about not just coordinating between DPWH,
Correct.
MMDA, DOTR, but also
And LGU.
But also DTI,
DTI,
DOT.
DOT, yes.
How new is that?
Well, that's quite a new concept. In fact, we started the convergence program with the Department of Tourism a few years ago, and that was actually one of the successful convergence program. We work together with the Department of Tourism, and they have this National Tourism Development Plan, and many of the roads leading to these tourism destinations are local roads, which have not been improved by the local government units because they always say they don't have the money. and many of them don't have the expertise. And therefore, national government, public works and highways, which should be taking care of the national roads, can support them by using our budget, our expertise, including our technical people, to make sure we improve the local roads leading to tourism destinations. The condition only is that the maintenance and upkeep of the local roads will have to be for the local government units.
One of the recommendations or conclusions in the Arangkada paper is that the government should not forget maintenance.
Correct.
That's the
It's
way
very
it's stated.
important. That's very important.
What's being done now that's different from previously so that for sure the maintenance is kept up?
We ensure that we have this memorandum of agreement with the local government units where the project is located to ensure that they will cover the maintenance of these local roads once finished. Because national government would have already provided the capital outlay and the expertise to improve this road. And in fact, the revenue that will be generated out of increased tourism arrivals, for example, or creating industries where we are improving the connectivity, will redound to the local government units, actually. So it's not really the national government who's going to benefit, but actually the local government. They will have more tourists visiting because you have better roads. And we also work together with LGU to make sure other facilities are provided. For example, there are enough, for example, with DOT, they should make sure that they promote the hotels and accommodations so that tourists will be attracted to, visit the areas.
You started your presentation, and the Arangkada paper mentions this as well, that we are behind in ASEAN 6, and we are in the bottom third in the whole WEF report. And Arangkada says we have to be ambitious, and I think you say the same thing. We have here with us today somebody from the private sector, Mr. Raul Romulo of San Miguel. San Miguel is one of the biggest infrastructure PPP participants. Do you think we are on track to, for example, getting close to Malaysia, Thailand, Indonesia standards in terms of infrastructure?
Well, the thrust to move and close the gap has started. Whether we can do that in the next, with the close of this administration is the question we would like to ask. But the important thing is this administration has very importantly began the steps and put the foundations in order to make an integrated plan finally come to fruition. We in the private sector just hope that the next administration will continue with the thrust that this government has initiated. We have experience in the past administrations when administrations change, the plans and the thrust of each government changes also. So a lot of the projects that this government has started on the infrastructure sphere are actually very good and very refreshing. And we would like to see a continuity going into the medium and long term. What
do you think the government and the private sector can do to ensure that these plans are maintained as we cross administrations?
Well, this government has actually opened the window to unsolicited proposals, and San Miguel is one of the most prolific submitters to this window, together with other conglomerates. What we'd like to see is the government continue with this effort, but also find a balance of including not just ODA, but also bringing back the PPP, as well as maybe continuing the hybrid financial structures to continue with trying to find ways to tighten the infrastructure gap. In our sphere, we'd like to see at least, and I see the government is beginning this, increasing their personnel and analytic people to be able to vet and analyze these projects to make it move faster. Right now, there is still a shortage of these expertise, and we would like to see the government increase this to be able to manage the projects that are being submitted.
There's a whole menu. You're saying that we should build up each of those classifications. What can the private sector, the government, do to ensure that when a new administration comes in, these projects continue, or most of these projects continue?
Well, as we were discussing earlier, perhaps the undersecretary from the rail side can explain, but he explained that in certain sectors of government now, they are promoting different financial tools and mechanism and lending groups that will ensure that the projects will continue into the fruition of the tenor without or with the least political interference as possible. I'll leave that to the Undersecretary to explain. But on the private sector, we should just continue to contribute our know-how, our expertise in every which way we can, which a lot of the private industries have been doing now, and to continue to share what other values we have to contribute to government.
Mr. Magno, Philippine National Rail, I think Raul was referring to our earlier discussion about ODA and what place that might have, which we found quite interesting when you were describing it earlier on.
Actually, the government's direction with ODA, one, as I discussed earlier, one, we are, before we even lay down what our objectives for rail is, the government had this concept of like the greater central region, which is practically an expansion of GMA and Metro Manila to include several provinces like Pampanga, Batangas. We wish to be the primary people mover. However, if we use 100% PPP model, let's say from Pampanga to, let's say, Makati, the fare box will be really expensive and it cannot support daily commuting service. So the
fare box is what the public can
Yes, it's actually like when you collect all the fares and then you put them in the project, will it sustain a project? Then that will be the basis of viability and the feasibility of a project. However, if we put PPP, the cost of financing ng private sector draws some of the money out of the fare box. So what we wish to do, we work with agencies like JICA. What we want to do is the infrastructure side, we want to borrow that through ODA, and then the operation and maintenance, like some of the San Miguel projects, it's BTOM, it's like build and then transfer, then we pay amortization payments. This time, we don't want the private sector to, build the infrastructure. We want to build the infrastructure, borrow the money from agencies like JICA, and then we put it for PPP, for operations and maintenance. So their balance sheets doesn't look ugly at all, actually, because the infrastructure cost would be with the national government. It's actually much more nimble if we do it that way.
And this helps ensure that projects continue beyond
Yes.
administrations?
Yes, and we don't tax the commuters that much. Like as I mentioned to you in the holding room, we have objectives like between habitation and place of employment. We want them to go there in 55 minutes and that it can be supported within minimum wage and all that stuff. So we cannot tax the fare box that much. That's why we are, one of the tools that we have in the toolbox is to use ODA to finance the infrastructure and manage our balance sheets.
Attorney Renado of Light Rail, LRT-1 was one of the biggest projects of the previous government, and there's a lot of promise to that. I think many of us were looking forward to being able to take the train all the way down south. Could you give us an update on that and whether in the last year or so, if things have picked up, accelerated? Because we've heard of setbacks there.
Well, it's better now than it was 1 year ago. We hope to earnestly begin physical construction by early next year. And I think in the policy brief, you read something, I read something on right-of-way law and the organizational capacity of government agencies to deliver right-of-way. And, well, I guess the LRT1 experience is instructive. I don't know how much time I have, but it's, organizational capacity, when we first started the Cavite extension, we realized that the right-of-way coordinates were all over the place. And maybe that was because the right-of-way coordinates were done back in the 1990s. It's actually a project conceived a long time ago. Now, we went to the project manager at the time and asked, oh, there's something wrong with the right-of-way. And the project manager goes, look, you have the road, just build on the middle of it. So for me, when I heard that, that kind of told me that maybe the organizational capacity isn't where you want it to be, because if you build a house, you want the coordinates definite. What more a 12-kilometer rail line where you just move one thing 1 meter, it affects the entire project. And we go through the process, and okay, we have to procure someone who will do the survey. That's 6 months. We have to procure someone to relocate the informal settlers. That's 6 months. Oh, now we have to terminate the contractor we procured for the informal settlers. So we need 2 months to terminate and another 6 months to procure. Oh no, the informal settler relocation site, we forgot that it needed a water pump. So it's gonna take us 6 months to procure a 30,000 peso water pump. And it just goes on and on, right? And when we were confronting those problems, and eventually the private sector just said, I'm gonna pay for that water pump. We're like, okay, and we kind of realized why, because, rail lines are placed on highways where there's little right-of-way and ISF issues. So if you give to that agency the power, the responsibility for relocating 1,500 informal settlers and expropriating more than 200 private parcels of land, you wonder maybe the government expertise on that is with the DPWH, but you realize why they can't tap the DPWH because they're building 1,000 kilometers worth of road. And so, yes, I agree that as Raul was saying, it's building up that organizational capacity to deliver on right-of-way.
We've been joined by Yoshio Wada of Japan International Cooperation Agency. And most of us in this room have heard about multiple or many JICA studies over the years, for which I guess the Philippine government thanks you. But in terms of implementation, I think that's where it is lacking. When you look at the Philippine transport infrastructure sector now, what do you think remains the main roadblock?
Thank you very much. Sorry being late. Okay. So
traffic?
Yeah, the traffic. Traffic is always a problem in the Philippines, right? So I have a little bit experience in other countries like India or Myanmar or Vietnam. And compared to other countries, Philippines is not bad actually in the awareness of railway sector, because the railway sector is very important, but many countries are not aware of that importance. So in the sense, this is just beginning of the awareness of the railway sector and also transportation issues in Philippines. So that's very good. So, but the issue really is maybe I should say that the social capacity of accommodating the railway sector, because the Philippines has so few engineers in the railway sectors and also few experts in railway sector. So maybe the human capacity or more human human capital should be created for the sector. So JICA is now assisting the formulation of a training center. That will be a railway training center in Valenzuela. That will be just started for the construction. And after that, maybe, of course, the extension of north-south corridor railway, and also new metro, Manila Metro, constructed in the east side. That might be very important, but even if the private or public, the human capacity and also organization capacity is a very important thing, as I pointed out for the ROW issues. So the first issue is maybe institutional issues one. And the second is maybe, of course, Japanese technology can be supplied from JICA. So that can be, the many railway facilities can be constructed, but operation is different issue actually. So that's very important.
I'd like to shift a little to the Arangkada recommendations. One of the recommendations there is open up PPPs and infrastructure projects in general more to foreign companies. I think the logic is you get more competition, more participation, maybe they're bigger as well, and they can handle some of these projects. I'd like to throw this question to the panel, beginning with Attorney Romulo. This would potentially be a competitor to you. What would be your view about opening up that market more to foreign players?
We are not adverse to opening the market. As everybody knows, the infrastructure gap in the country is very wide. And the capacity of all the conglomerates in the country today will still fall short, even if you put all of our efforts together. So, of course, it will mean less business for us. But once you get all of these infrastructure facilities built together, it will redound to the betterment of the whole economy. And it will benefit each of the conglomerates eventually and the Filipino people. So we're not averse to that. Competition is good. May I also ask, since we touched on right-of-way earlier, Yusek Cabral, maybe you would like to enlighten the public that's here today that the new steps that have been done with the right-of-way to improve from the past administration, and how you think we can further improve that going forward, because it's still a major challenge for a lot of our projects as it is right now.
Back in 2016, before Yusek Cabral answers, a law was passed which I thought was supposed to help in the right-of-way issue. But as I learned this morning before the panel, it's opened up some problems as well. Before we get into those problems, which I'm not sure that Raul has shared with you, but you can share with us, how does the right-of-way picture look now?
Okay, I would want to react first to the capacity issue on the possibility of opening up to foreign companies. Of course, government welcomes that. In fact, the PPP program of DPWH is only about 5 to 7% of the whole budget. And around 80% of our projects are locally funded. And about 10 to 15% are ODA. So you see the bulk of the project is not just ODA funded. And therefore, the capacity issue is not just on PPP or ODA, but also on the locally funded projects. Meaning, we have to have enough number of contractors to build all this. And you just saw the DPWH program. What about the other agencies, infra, correct? We just have to have enough technical people, engineers, experts, consultants, architects. So again, the challenge is not just on capacity of government, but also on the capacity of the private sector, particularly of the construction industry and the consulting industry sector, correct? So this is as much issue as that of the capacity of government being able to absorb all of this. Because even if we lay down all of this and we have the budget, does the private sector have enough? For example, number of contractors. How many contractors, AAA, accredited. That's why government has opened the doors now for foreign contractors, accrediting quadruple A, so that they'll be able to participate in big ticket projects, not just for PPP or ODA. Going back to the right of way remains to be a challenge, not just of DPWH, but all agencies implementing infrastructure. We had that law passed in 2015 and became effective. And this actually identified a lot of areas aimed to accelerate acquisition of right-of-way. Of course, there will be hiccups. For example, one of the requirements of the new law is an independent land appraiser. And therefore, ang daming pumila, naghanap ng independent land appraiser because that's the only basis for us to offer the market value to acquire the right-of-way, okay? Because the market value is now the first offer. In the past, it was the zonal value. So now it's the market value. But we have to have the appraisal value made or prepared by an independent. So nabulunan, no, ang mga land appraiser. But we now have this MOA with Land Bank. And they are also already, they have already identified ways to beef up their capacity to appraise. No? Sa umpisa lang naman yan. Another challenge on right-of-way acquisition is the relocation of informal settlers. In this country, we have one of the, tedious right-of-way law. Informal settlers, no demolition, no relocation, no demolition. That's the order. And therefore, we have to make sure that before we relocate the informal settlers, we have to have the area or houses where they will be relocated. And it's the mandate of NHA to build the houses for the informal settlers. We are working together with NHA. The budget is not the issue. It's the capacity, again, of NHA to build as many houses, build houses. Backlog na nga sa Yolanda, meron Marawi, and we have Metro Manila for the relocation for our big ticket projects. After this, I'll have to run to COA to meet COA chair together with Secretary Villar to discuss on how to facilitate the construction of houses being done by NHA. Kasi sila din, kung pwede nga lang kami magtayo, ginawa ko na. But having said that, Public Works have created task force for each project that we are implementing under the BBB program. These are the big ticket projects. We also have taken on the task of acquiring right-of-way for projects by the OTR. So, for example, Skyway. We took charge of that last, when Secretary Villar took the helm of DPWH, we supported the OTR and take the helm of acquiring the right-of-way for Skyway, Toll Road 4, what else?
Why did you have to?
Because it was actually being done by the OTR through TRB. Okay. And since the OTR said, while DPWH already has a lot on its plate, would you help us acquire the right-of-way? O sige, ang boss, sabi nila, sama-sama daw together to deliver the build. We took on acquiring the right-of-way for this big-ticket projects.
What's that rule?
They do have the expertise.
DPWH also has the expertise. They've always had.
They're more
the
expert at that. Yeah.
Oh, while I won't say it's expertise, we are better than the other agencies.
Mas maganda na yung expertise kaysa better.
Kasi marami din, I mean, at the end of the day, you will see in the news that there's delayed projects are delayed because of right-of-way acquisition. Yes.
Yusek, sama mo na rin kaming real.
It's actually a bandwidth issue with them.
Parang you can outsource that even to the private sector.
Actually, that has been discussed, outsourcing right-of-way. But bottom line, private sector would always say, government, you have that eminent domain power. Pag kami ang nakipag-usap, tinataasan yung value. So you better be on the front line and, negotiate in behalf of the private sector, even if it's unsolicited. So we
Mr.
do that.
Magno, let me just interject. DOTR took a different approach. What we did is we have the key shelter agencies like HUD-C, PCUP, and then NHA and SHAF-C. We recognized na meron ng bandwidth issue with the PWH and some other agencies. So what we did, we had an experience called North Rail, that it was supposed to be a transport project, it became a resettlement project. So we were like bogged down. So part of the lessons learned of the North Rail project is, okay, let's take the resettlement out of the way, and let's concentrate on the transport project, and let's push these key shelter agencies to do the resettlement and the right-of-way issues. Right-of-way is practically resettlement, 50% resettlement. That's what we saw. So part of that is to empower the key shelter agencies, and that's what we did. And actually, that's true. DPWH is really good in the row acquisition. It's much more of the row is bogged down because of resettlement and because of the LINA law.
Attorney Randa, you wanted to add?
Yeah, well, I was just about to add the Right-of-Way Act, the new Right-of-Way law. I guess it has made things better, but obviously it's not enough. I think two things which we experience in LRT1 is, when you cut through right-of-way through a piece of private property, it's never a clean cut. There'll always be this orphan lot which you can't even park a car on. Of course, the private landowner would say, hey, I can't use that anymore. Compensate me. The government would say, but I'm not buying that land. Why should I compensate you? So I guess that's one thing. And second is, it's probably not a right-of-way law issue, but more of maybe Commission on Audit Rules or internal audit rules. But Meralco relocation, right? Of course, Meralco would say, for me to relocate these 115 kV towers, 200 whatever, I'm going to have to buy all the materials abroad. And I need you to pay me 40% down payment because I have to buy those materials. And in the private sector, that's all fine. That's all understandable. Of course, government might tend to say, but I can't do that. I can only pay you once the project is done or some other milestone. So I think it's bridging those issues, which also.
Let me just join that part of the discussion. On the utilities relocation, we also have a plan how to resolve that. What we do now with Meralco is we will put the payments in escrow and then just complete the work. The money's there. We're not going to touch it. Once you finish, we transfer it to you.
And Meralco accepts that?
Meralco, telcos, and then the water utilities. We've done that. With Mr. Wada, the test case is actually the Tutuban to Malolos rail project. Believe it or not, we're almost 90% done with utilities relocation. Much more faster than LRMC, who started like 3 years ago from us. So we've tested that, okay, this strategy works. Secretary Togade wants to implement it to all rail projects now. So ni-integrate na namin yun with the LRMC and
Mr. Wada, how does that, could you elaborate on this example?
Yes, because you know that Manila is one of the most dense city in the world, populated and also very densely populated. So right-of-way problem is always there in any parts of Manila. So I think the institutionally it can be solved, but like escrow account or creating new laws or creating good capacities. But somehow there is a limit to solve all the problems. So maybe it's better to get better technology to solve it, because so that means going underway or going underground or going high or other way, because there are so many infrastructure facilities inside Manila. So it's really hard or it's impossible to coordinate all of them. So it's better to use better technologies.
Let me probably add. The orphan lot, what we do is that, of course, we cannot pay. There are certain auditing rules. But what we do with an orphan lot, especially talagang wala nang use, is that let the private sector file. Then, if to justify na wala naman talaga siyang magiging use na, then that's the time we can pay. So there's really a remedy to settle the orphan lots. We just have to make the court tell government, otherwise bawal talaga sa COA. But that's easy because what the private sector can do is just file for the compensation of the orphan lot with the justification, and then we can deposit and settle that, no? Justifying. On the matter of the polls, the Meralco polls, we successfully did the NAIA Expressway with all the Meralco poles. Andyan pa yung airport. So we were able to get the arrangement in place with the Meralco through a memorandum of agreement and compensate them. Well, of course, subject to existing rules. But that's not the only issue with Meralco. You were talking of electric poles all over, right? You can travel a national road and see electric poles on the road because that has not been relocated. And when we widen, it poses greater hazard rather than, provide additional lane. So there's this NEA law that compels agencies like Department of Energy and Department of Public Works and Highways to work on relocating the poles, electric poles outside the existing national roads. Yung Meralco, sa malalaki lang yan, pero the national road, you could see a lot of electric poles right on the middle of the road, which creates more hazard than safety.
May I add anything? Anyway,
is this still about right of way?
Still, just the last, maybe, Kathy, in your department, since you've seen all of the variations and all of the problems that we've encountered, both the public and the private sector with right-of-way. We already have a new right-of-way act. Perhaps you can ask your secretary to assist in sponsoring amendments to the right-of-way. Maybe Congress can help us here. When you see infra projects of national significance, perhaps there can be a clause for reclassifying these areas for infrastructure use so it can be immediately used. And there, again, in reclassifying, there is a timetable there. No? So perhaps you can recommend, and with the help of Congress,
certainly.
find a better solution to our problems. And as gentleman from JICA said, we do employ a lot of engineering solutions now, as Yusek Cabral knows, for our Skyway. When we could not go through a certain very heavily congested area, we went around it on top of water. For NAIA, we went on the Tripatigallina, and it just, we had gone under. For Skyway Stage 3, we're going around the San Juan River alignment. So we're finding solutions there. There are many solutions there. And in terms of finding other creative solutions, we have done this also with the Department of Public Highways. If there are areas where we can advance the purchase of the land, we have agreements with the government for as long as they pay us back. We will advance the purchase of the land. So there is but if we can find a way to implement a better solution, we would welcome that.
Thank you. That's a good idea. I think I will pitch for the secretary to convene, probably to start reviewing again and see where we can again introduce some amendments or improvements in the existing right-of-way law.
Before we go to questions from the audience, I'd like to end with this question for everyone. The Arangkada paper talks about the need to be ambitious about our infrastructure planning. Could I ask the gentleman and the lady in the panel, do you think we're being ambitious enough? And also, ambition and plans, such as the plans we have from JICA, are one thing. But what kind of new energy or political will needs to be put in place so that these ambitious plans can be effected? Raul?
Excuse me.
Yeah. What would it take, you think, so that all these plans will finally come into place?
Okay. Yeah, I think the capability of Philippine government is very good, and also what they are doing is very good, and people's recognition of the importance of this issue is very good. So I think the plan can be achieved, and also the many good results will be realized. So that's my hope actually, and also expectation actually. But I think I'm repeatedly saying that not just institutional solutions, but also engineering solutions is very important in this in this level of the problem, because what we are encountering in Philippines is the world's most dense city with many people moving around. So that the kind of challenge for the human society. So I think it's better to get engineering solution.
Rule. Same question. What would it take for these ambitious plans to happen?
Well, we've seen very good plans from JICA. Through the years, they've recommended very good plans for the country and its infrastructure growth. We would like to see finally an integrated master plan put in effect using the JICA plans and all the other plans that have been submitted to government through the years, and see it done through continuous administrations for implementation. We would also like to see a rationalization, as recommended in your paper, of agencies. For example, just at the top of my head, you have CAAP as your regulator for airports. At the same time, they're also managing airports, and there are conflicts there. So if you can rationalize that as well in not only one aspect of the agency, but all throughout. So you'll have a continuous delivery and sustainable program development going into the future.
Attorney?
Well, I guess in terms of encouraging private sector participation in a very capital-intensive industry like rail, I guess the private sector will always look at how government is able to deliver on its obligations under the contract. We touched on right of way earlier, and I think the 1,000-pound gorilla in the room often is the obligation to pay, right? Fare increases, for example. We've seen it not only in rail, we've seen it in water, we've seen it in tollways, and the uncertainty is very difficult for us. We want to be the best, right? Why can't we be mentioned in the same breath as Singapore, Hong Kong rail, Japan? We want to be the best, right? Second is it's hard dealing with the banks, because in a project finance setting, if you're an energy company, you could just mortgage the plant. But in a rail setting, since the government owns the asset, the banks will just say, I'm looking at your revenues. And for me to say, I promised you that on this date it would be this amount, but we're only this because fare increases haven't been granted. It's a tough discussion to have, right? And we should give a lot of credit to our riders. It's not simply value of money; it's time value of money. When PNR increased the rates by I think a peso or so, when the media went around interviewing people, they would look, as long as there's an improvement in service, we will pay. We also have the same experience in LRT1. After the fare increase in 2014, ridership dropped 10-15%. But because of the improvements in service we've made, we're there again at those high points of riderships. And when the jeepneys increased their fares, people were complaining, not really because of the increase in the fare, but more because we'll pay more for the same old jeepney. Right? And that's why a lot of people don't like taxis and there's a taxi fare increase coming up, because it's the same old taxi. And that's why they go to Grab or Uber, because even though it's more expensive, hey, better service. That's why these P2P buses, they're expensive, but better service. So, I think, it's hopefully there's more certainty around fare increases. Well, that's one. And then second is, just to echo Rose's point about, having, in terms of national, regulator of railway. Yes, we need that because, I think a few years back there was talk about rail operators having to secure congressional franchises. I had nightmares for weeks, right? So, we need a professional regulator. We need laws which are specific to the rail industry because we can't rely on malicious mischief under the revised penal code, loitering provisions under local government laws. No, we need, just like in airports, we need specific laws for railway, especially now that we're developing hundreds and hundreds of miles of railway. So,
June?
To deliver all these ambitious projects, the government is hedging it on the hybrid PPP, where the cost of infrastructure is under ODA or some other means of financing. And then the operation and maintenance, we want to offer that for PPP. We agree. The private sector could run these services much more efficiently because of their faster procurement process. And then there's optimization and best practices. So that's what we wish to do. One point on foreign participation. A lot of foreign companies wants to participate, but they want to sell. What we want to tell them is, come here and bring your money too, right? Instead of just sell something to us, right? So that's what we want to say.
Yusek, we have 1 minute.
Let me speak for DPWH. And not just for the transport sector or the road infra of DPWH. We have the budget. We have the master plan. We have decisive leaders. To make this work, we have to closely work together. National government, local governments, of course the legislative branch, to make sure, budgets are passed and provided for all these big ticket projects, most especially the private sector. At the end of the day, much is expected not just from us, but also from the private sector with all the technology, the skills and the expertise that private sector can bring, not only for the PPP projects, but also for the rest of the projects that are being implemented, either through ODA or through local funds. Let's do this not just for us, but for our children and their children, right? And their children's children.
We've ended exactly on time. I'd like to ask if there's time for questions from the audience. No more? Okay, in that case, please join me in thanking the excellent panel this afternoon.
Many thanks for everyone who joined our panel and made it a very interesting discussion. May we ask the whole panel to please stay on stage for a quick photo opportunity. While the speakers are having their photos on stage, may we invite you to tweet about the event by using our hashtag Arangkada Fora 2018. And please connect with us on Facebook as well as LinkedIn. Please also don't forget to complete and submit your evaluation forms. We will be getting them at the registration counter at the foyer area. Your lunch is actually being served already, and we would invite everybody to enjoy and partake of this sumptuous lunch. We would also like to thank our sponsors and partners without whom this forum would not have been possible. We would like to thank our gold sponsors: Metro Pacific Investments Corporation, Regis, Santos Knight Frank, Hamlin Iturralde Corporation or Team Asia. Our silver sponsors: Bank of the Philippine Islands, Dole Asia, Eastern Telecommunications Philippines, Emerson, First Philippine Holdings, Meralco, CISIP Gores Velayo and Company, Travelers International Hotel Group Inc. or Resorts World Manila. Our bronze sponsors: Capital One Philippine Support Services Corporation, International Container Terminal Services Incorporated, Royal Cargo Incorporated, Pilipinas Shell Petroleum Corporation, and Union Bank of the Philippines. Our patron sponsors are AutoNation Group Incorporated, distributor of Mercedes-Benz, BDO Unibank Incorporated, Manila Water Company Incorporated, Marubeni Philippines Corporation, and Megawide Construction Corporation. Our supporting partner, Pacific Cross Insurance Incorporated. For our exhibitors, Strengthening Urban Resilience for Growth with Equity, Surge Project, official connectivity partner, PLDT Enterprise, official wine partner, Fourth and Tay, and official venue partner, Marriott Hotel Manila. We would also like to thank our table sponsors, the American Chamber of Commerce of the Philippines Incorporated, Association of International Shipping Lines Incorporated, the Australian New Zealand Chamber of Commerce, Canadian Chamber of Commerce of the Philippines, Chamber of Commerce of the Philippine Islands, Dow Chemical, European Chamber of Commerce of the Philippines, Federation of Filipino-Chinese Chambers of Commerce and Industry, the Japanese Chamber of Commerce and Industry of the Philippines Incorporated, Korean Chamber of Commerce of the Philippines, the Makati Business Club, Management Association of the Philippines, Philippine Association of Multinational Companies Regional Headquarters Incorporated, Philippine Association of Water Districts, Philippine Chamber of Commerce and Industry, Philippine Exporters Confederation Incorporated, and the Philippine Independent Power Producers Association. We would also like to thank our media partners from ANC, Adobo Magazine, Business World, GMA, Inquirer.net, Interaction, Oxford Business Group, The Philippine Star, Philstar.com, and Rappler. Lastly, we are inviting you to check out the booth of Terramag Publishing and learn more about the proceeds from the Marawi and Beyond, the Joint Task Force Marawi Storybooks and CD music album Ala Ala sa Marawi. After the program, we would like to invite everybody to join us for the networking cocktails at the foyer and exhibition area. Thank you.
Fluctuating global markets, the missing links in the cold chain, expanding regulations and industry safety concerns, the true impact of the Internet of Things, these are just some of the critical challenges facing our customers. And they only underscore the importance of our transformation into one Emerson. We are organizing the best human talent and our best-in-class technologies around automation solutions and commercial and residential solutions. Two core platforms within a single company. This will make us stronger, more relevant, and better suited than ever to leverage our true scale and scope. A focused engineering powerhouse capable of rising to meet our customers and the world's new challenges. With leadership positions across critical global industries like oil and gas, chemical, refining, power, and life sciences, our Emerson Automation Solutions platform is uniquely situated to help our customers achieve the top quartile performance that makes them more successful in uncertain times and rapidly changing market conditions. Our commercial and residential solutions platform continues to provide the business-to-business and business-to-consumer technologies that shape the industry's advancing energy efficiency and environmental conservation, ensuring human comfort and health and protecting food quality and sustainability, all to make our world a better place to live and work. And across both Emerson platforms, we are making the industrial Internet of Things real and relevant. From our PlantWeb digital ecosystem to the Sensi connected home, we are enhancing productivity and providing new customer value. This transformation is the fullest expression of the Emerson spirit of engineering full on. The enduring strength of our vast industry expertise, matched only by our adaptive nature, will put us in position of success over the long term. And will continue to support our promise that with Emerson, you can always consider it solved.
We believe in the power of good. Some might say that's idealistic. We like to think it's a better way of doing business. Good helps us power more homes with less impact on the environment. Good is why we've taken the lead in generating clean,